marked a pivotal moment in Mesopotamian history when Nabopolassar, a Chaldean chieftain from the marshy regions of southern Babylonia, seized control of Babylon and declared independence from Assyrian overlordship. This audacious act of rebellion would ultimately reshape the political landscape of the ancient Near East and establish the foundation of what would become the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Nabopolassar's origins remain somewhat obscure, though contemporary sources indicate he emerged from the Chaldean tribes that had settled in the fertile marshlands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers during the previous centuries. The Chaldeans, originally a Semitic people who had migrated into Babylonia around the 10th century BC, had gradually integrated into Mesopotamian society while maintaining their distinct tribal identity. Unlike the urban elites of Babylon, these tribal groups possessed considerable military prowess and maintained a degree of autonomy even under Assyrian rule. The timing of Nabopolassar's rebellion was no coincidence. The Assyrian Empire, despite its apparent strength, was experiencing significant internal strains by the mid-7th century BC. The death of Ashurbanipal around 627 BC had triggered a succession crisis that weakened central authority and created opportunities for ambitious provincial leaders. The Assyrian military, stretched thin across vast territories from Egypt to Iran, struggled to maintain effective control over distant provinces. Administrative corruption, economic difficulties, and the burden of constant warfare had eroded the empire's foundations. Nabopolassar's initial moves demonstrated both political acumen and military capability. Rather than launching a direct assault on Assyrian forces, he methodically consolidated control over southern Babylonia, winning over local populations through a combination of diplomatic overtures and targeted military actions. Contemporary Babylonian chronicles describe how he systematically captured key cities including Uruk and Nippur, often encountering minimal resistance from populations weary of Assyrian taxation and military conscription. The establishment of the Chaldean dynasty represented more than a simple change of rulers. Nabopolassar deliberately positioned himself as a legitimate heir to ancient Babylonian traditions, adopting royal titles that emphasize continuity with the great kings of the past. He restored temples, reinstated traditional religious ceremonies, and presented his rule as a return to proper Mesopotamian governance after decades of foreign domination. This cultural legitimization proved crucial in securing support from Babylonian priests and urban populations who had chafed under Assyrian religious policies. The strategic masterstroke that would ultimately ensure Nabopolassar's success came through his alliance with Cyaxares, king of the Median Empire. The Medes, an Indo-Iranian people who had established a powerful kingdom in western Iran, shared Babylon's antipathy toward Assyrian hegemony. Cyaxares had been consolidating Median power since approximately 625 BC, unifying various Iranian tribes under his leadership and building a formidable military force. The Babylonian-Median alliance, formalized around 614 BC, represented a calculated strategic partnership that would prove decisive in the coming conflict. Both powers recognized that neither could single-handedly defeat the Assyrian war machine, but their combined forces could potentially overwhelm Assyrian defenses. The alliance also provided crucial geographic advantages, as Median forces could threaten Assyria's eastern borders, while Babylonian armies attacked from the south, forcing the Assyrians to divide their military resources. Cyaxares brought significant military innovations to the alliance. Median cavalry units, renowned for their mobility and effectiveness in both reconnaissance and shock combat, complemented Babylonian infantry formations and siege capabilities. The Medes had also adopted and improved upon Assyrian military technologies, including advanced siege engines and iron weaponry, while developing their own tactical innovations suited to their mountainous homeland. The first major test of the alliance came in 614 BC, when Median forces captured the ancient Assyrian city of Assur. This victory demonstrated the vulnerability of Assyrian heartland territories and provided crucial psychological momentum for the anti-Assyrian coalition. Archaeological evidence from Assur reveals extensive destruction layers dating to this period, indicating the thoroughness of the Median assault. The capture of Assur also yielded significant material benefits, as the city's temples and palaces contained vast treasures accumulated over centuries of Assyrian expansion. Following the fall of Assur, Nabopolassar and Cyaxares coordinated their strategy for the ultimate prize, Nineveh, the magnificent capital of the Assyrian Empire. The city, located on the east bank of the Tigris River in modern-day Iraq, represented the pinnacle of Assyrian power and civilization. Its massive defensive walls, measuring approximately 12 kilometers in circumference, enclosed palaces, temples, libraries, and residential districts housing hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. The siege of Nineveh began in earnest in 612 BC, with Babylonian and Median forces converging on the city from multiple directions. Contemporary accounts describe a coordinated assault that exploited both military tactics and environmental factors. The attackers constructed extensive siege works, including earthen ramps and protective barriers, while their engineers worked to undermine the city's formidable walls. A crucial factor in Nineveh's fall was the flooding of the Tigris River, which contemporary sources suggest may have been artificially induced by the besiegers. The rising waters weakened sections of the city's mud brick fortifications, creating breaches that allowed assault troops to penetrate the defences. Archaeological excavations at Nineveh have revealed evidence of violent destruction, including burned buildings, scattered human remains, and abandoned household goods that testify to the chaos of the city's final hours. The psychological impact of Nineveh's destruction cannot be overstated. For over 2 centuries, the city had served as the nerve centre of the world's most powerful empire. Its libraries contained thousands of cuneiform tablets, documenting Assyrian administrative practices, literary works, and scientific knowledge. The royal palaces, adorned with magnificent relief sculptures depicting royal hunts and military victories, had symbolized Assyrian might to diplomats and tribute bearers from across the known world. The death of the Assyrian king Sin-shar-ishkun during the siege marked the effective end of the Assyrian Empire as a major power. While some Assyrian forces retreated westward under Ashur-uballit II, establishing a rump state at Harran with Egyptian support, the empire's capacity for sustained resistance had been permanently broken. The destruction of Nineveh sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world, as kingdoms that had submitted to Assyrian authority for generations suddenly found themselves free from imperial control. The aftermath of Nineveh's fall required careful diplomatic management between the victorious allies. Nabopolassar and Cyaxares had to negotiate the division of former Assyrian territories while maintaining their cooperative relationship. The territorial arrangements they established would have lasting consequences for the political geography of the ancient Near East. Media received the northern and eastern portions of the former Assyrian Empire, including much of modern-day northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey. This allocation reflected both Median military contributions to the victory and their geographic position, which made them natural heirs to Assyrian territories in the Iranian highlands and Anatolian borderlands. Median control extended over important trade routes connecting Iran with Mesopotamia and Anatolia, providing substantial economic benefits to Cyaxares' kingdom. Babylon's share included the core Mesopotamian territories along with western regions extending toward the Mediterranean coast. This division gave Nabopolassar control over the wealthy agricultural lands of northern Mesopotamia and positioned Babylon to inherit Assyria's role in Levantine affairs. The acquisition of these territories brought substantial increases in agricultural production, tribute income, and strategic depth for the emerging Neo-Babylonian state. The territorial consolidation process required more than simple military occupation. Both powers had to establish new administrative systems, integrate local populations, and manage the complex web of relationships that had characterized Assyrian provincial governance. Many former Assyrian officials and military commanders sought accommodation with the new rulers, bringing valuable administrative experience and local knowledge to their service. Nabopolassar proved particularly adept at managing this transition. Rather than implementing wholesale purges of former Assyrian administrators, he selectively retained competent officials who demonstrated loyalty to the new regime. This pragmatic approach helped maintain administrative continuity and reduced resistance from local populations, who might otherwise have suffered from governmental disruption. The economic implications of territorial expansion were substantial. Control over former Assyrian trade routes provided access to luxury goods, raw materials, and commercial networks that had previously enriched the Assyrian treasury. Babylonian merchants could now operate under state protection across territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, while tribute from subject populations provided resources for military expansion and monumental construction projects. Religious considerations also played important roles in territorial consolidation. Both Nabopolassar and Cyaxares had to address the religious sensibilities of diverse populations within their expanded domains. The Babylonian approach emphasized restoration of traditional Mesopotamian religious practices while respecting local customs and deities. This policy helped legitimize Babylonian rule among populations that had experienced religious disruption under Assyrian administration. The military lessons learned during the anti-Assyrian campaigns influenced subsequent Neo-Babylonian military organization and strategy. The successful coordination between Babylonian and Median forces demonstrated the value of combined operations and technological exchange. Babylonian military engineers incorporated Median cavalry tactics and siege technologies, while Median forces adopted Babylonian organizational methods and logistical practices. The death of Nabopolassar in 605 BC marked a critical transition moment for the nascent Neo-Babylonian Empire. His son Nebuchadnezzar, who had already demonstrated exceptional military capability during campaigns against Egyptian forces at Carchemish, ascended to the throne amid ongoing geopolitical tensions that threatened to destabilize the hard-won territorial gains of the previous 2 decades. The new king inherited not merely a kingdom, but a complex web of international relationships, military obligations, and administrative challenges that would define his remarkable 43-year reign. Nebuchadnezzar's accession occurred during active military operations against Egyptian forces attempting to reassert control over the Levant. The young king had been commanding Babylonian armies in Syria when news of his father's death reached him, forcing an immediate return to Babylon to secure his succession. This transition demonstrated the sophisticated administrative systems that Nabopolassar had established, as governmental functions continued smoothly despite the royal absence and the potential for succession disputes. The new monarch's first major challenge came from Pharaoh Necho II of Egypt, who viewed the collapse of Assyrian power as an opportunity to extend Egyptian influence northward into traditional spheres of Mesopotamian control. Egyptian forces had already established footholds in Gaza and other coastal cities, while Egyptian diplomats worked to forge alliances with Levantine kingdoms seeking alternatives to Babylonian hegemony. This Egyptian resurgence posed a direct threat to Babylonian commercial interests and territorial integrity. Nebuchadnezzar's response revealed both strategic acumen and operational flexibility. Rather than immediately launching massive military campaigns, he methodically consolidated Babylonian control over recently acquired territories while building the administrative and logistical infrastructure necessary for sustained military operations across vast distances. This preparatory phase included establishing supply depots, improving road networks, and negotiating agreements with local rulers who could provide auxiliary forces and intelligence. The king's military campaigns began in earnest around 604 BC, with systematic operations designed to eliminate Egyptian influence from the Levant, while deterring potential rebellions among Babylonian vassals. These campaigns differed markedly from previous Assyrian approaches to territorial control. Where Assyrian kings had often relied on brutal suppression and mass deportations to maintain order, Nebuchadnezzar employed a more nuanced strategy that combined military pressure with diplomatic incentives and economic integration. The siege of Ashkelon in 604 BC exemplified this new approach to imperial expansion. The Philistine city, located on the Mediterranean coast approximately 50 kilometers south of modern Tel Aviv, had maintained close ties with Egypt and served as a crucial link in Egyptian supply chains, supporting anti-Babylonian activities throughout the region. Rather than simply destroying the city, Nebuchadnezzar's forces conducted a methodical siege that demonstrated Babylonian military capabilities while offering terms for surrender that preserved the city's economic functions under Babylonian oversight. Archaeological evidence from Ashkelon reveals the sophistication of Babylonian siege techniques during this period. Excavations have uncovered evidence of systematic undermining operations, including tunnels designed to collapse sections of the city's defensive walls. The attackers also constructed elaborate earthwork fortifications that prevented relief efforts while protecting Babylonian forces from defensive fire. These engineering accomplishments required substantial logistical support and demonstrated the organizational capabilities that would characterize Nebuchadnezzar's later construction projects. The fall of Ashkelon sent clear signals throughout the Levant regarding Babylonian military capabilities and political intentions. Unlike previous conquerors who had simply extracted tribute and moved on, Nebuchadnezzar established permanent administrative structures that integrated conquered territories into the broader Babylonian economic system. Local rulers who submitted willingly retained their positions under Babylonian oversight, while those who resisted faced removal and replacement with more compliant administrators. This administrative approach proved particularly effective in managing the complex ethnic and religious diversity of Levantine populations. The region contained Phoenician city-states, Aramean kingdoms, Hebrew territories, and various tribal groups, each with distinct cultural traditions and political structures. Nebuchadnezzar's officials developed flexible governance systems that respected local customs while ensuring compliance with Babylonian strategic objectives and fiscal requirements. The expansion of Babylonian territory during this period created unprecedented opportunities for economic development and cultural exchange. Control over Mediterranean coastal cities provided access to maritime trade networks that connected Mesopotamia with Cyprus, Anatolia, and the Aegean world. Babylonian merchants established trading posts in major ports, while Levantine craftsmen and agricultural products flowed eastward to supply growing urban populations in Babylonia proper. The Kingdom of Judah presented particularly complex challenges for Babylonian expansion. Unlike other Levantine territories, Judah possessed strong cultural and religious traditions that emphasized political independence and resistance to foreign domination. The Hebrew monarchy had maintained precarious independence through careful diplomatic maneuvering between competing regional powers, but the collapse of Assyrian authority and the rise of Babylonian hegemony forced difficult choices upon King Jehoiakim and his advisors. Initial relations between Babylon and Judah followed established patterns of vassal relationships common throughout the ancient Near East. Jehoiakim acknowledged Babylonian suzerainty and agreed to pay regular tribute in exchange for internal autonomy and protection from Egyptian interference. This arrangement satisfied immediate Babylonian strategic requirements while allowing Hebrew political and religious institutions to continue functioning with minimal external interference. However, the stability of this relationship depended upon broader geopolitical circumstances that remained volatile throughout the early years of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Egyptian diplomatic efforts to create anti-Babylonian coalitions included substantial promises of military support for rebellious vassals, while internal Hebrew politics featured competing factions advocating different approaches to foreign policy. Pro-Egyptian elements within the Hebrew court argued for alliance with Pharaoh Necho, while more pragmatic voices counselled continued accommodation with Babylonian authority. The delicate balance of Judean politics collapsed around 601 BC when Jehoiakim, apparently convinced by Egyptian promises of support, ceased paying tribute to Babylon and began coordinating resistance activities with other disaffected vassals. This rebellion coincided with renewed Egyptian military activities in the Levant, suggesting coordinated planning between Hebrew and Egyptian leadership. The timing proved catastrophically poor for Judean interests, as Nebuchadnezzar had by this point consolidated Babylonian control over surrounding territories and possessed the military resources necessary for sustained siege operations. Nebuchadnezzar's response to Hebrew rebellion demonstrated the systematic approach that characterized his military campaigns. Rather than immediately marching on Jerusalem, Babylonian forces first secured their lines of communication and eliminated potential sources of external support for the rebels. Phoenician cities that had maintained neutrality found themselves under pressure to declare their positions explicitly, while Aramean territories received clear warnings about the consequences of supporting Hebrew resistance. The first siege of Jerusalem began in 597 BC with Babylonian forces establishing comprehensive blockades around the city while conducting diplomatic negotiations aimed at securing surrender without prolonged fighting. The death of Jehoiakim during the siege, whether from natural causes or internal political violence, created opportunities for negotiated settlement that Nebuchadnezzar exploited skillfully. The new king, Jehoiachin, faced impossible military circumstances and chose surrender over the complete destruction of his kingdom. The terms imposed upon Jerusalem in 597 BC reflected Nebuchadnezzar's broader approach to territorial administration. Rather than destroying the Hebrew kingdom entirely, Babylonian officials removed potential sources of future rebellion while preserving the basic governmental and economic structures that made the territory valuable. The deportation of approximately 10,000 members of the Hebrew elite, including skilled craftsmen, military officers and religious leaders, served multiple purposes. It eliminated potential rebellion leaders while providing valuable human resources for Babylonian development projects. The selection process for deportees revealed sophisticated understanding of Hebrew society and politics. Babylonian administrators identified individuals whose removal would most effectively prevent future resistance while avoiding actions that might provoke popular uprisings among the remaining population. Skilled metal workers, carpenters, and stonemasons were particularly valued for their potential contributions to ongoing construction projects in Babylon itself. The installation of Zedekiah as a puppet ruler represented another example of Nebuchadnezzar's pragmatic approach to imperial administration. Rather than imposing direct Babylonian governance, which would have required substantial administrative resources and risked provoking religious resistance, the arrangement allowed Hebrew institutions to continue functioning under close Babylonian supervision. This approach proved cost-effective and initially successful in maintaining stability while extracting the economic benefits of territorial control. The massive construction projects that defined Nebuchadnezzar's reign began during this period of territorial consolidation and reflected both the wealth generated by imperial expansion and the king's vision of Babylon as the paramount city of the ancient world. The resources required for these undertakings were enormous, involving not only the labour of deportees from conquered territories, but also the skills of craftsmen recruited from throughout the known world and the raw materials extracted from the empire's vast territorial holdings. The reconstruction and expansion of Babylon's defensive walls represented one of the most ambitious engineering projects of the ancient world. The new fortifications extended the earlier defensive perimeter to encompass growing suburban areas, while incorporating advanced military technologies developed through centuries of Mesopotamian warfare. The walls reached heights of approximately 25 meters in some sections, with foundations extending deep into the earth to prevent undermining operations of the type that Babylonian forces had themselves employed against enemy cities. The famous Ishtar Gate, dedicated to the Mesopotamian goddess of love and war, served both defensive and ceremonial functions within this expanded fortification system. The gate's brilliant blue-glazed brick facade, decorated with relief sculptures of dragons and bulls representing various deities, demonstrated the artistic and technical capabilities that Babylonian craftsmen had achieved under royal patronage. The manufacturing processes required for these glazed bricks involved sophisticated ceramic technologies that had been developed over generations of Mesopotamian artistic tradition. The processional way, extending from the Ishtar Gate toward the city's ceremonial centre, created a magnificent avenue for religious festivals and royal ceremonies that showcased Babylonian wealth and power to visitors from throughout the empire. The roadway's construction required precise engineering to ensure proper drainage and structural stability, while its decorative elements included additional glazed brick reliefs depicting lions sacred to the goddess Ishtar. The psychological impact of this architectural ensemble upon foreign dignitaries and tribute bearers contributed significantly to Babylonian diplomatic influence throughout the region. The legendary Hanging Gardens, though their historical existence remains debated among modern scholars, represented the pinnacle of Babylonian engineering ambition during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Contemporary accounts describe elaborate irrigation systems that lifted water from the Euphrates River to supply terraced gardens rising to heights that allowed views across the Mesopotamian plain. The technical challenges involved in such construction would have required innovations in hydraulic engineering, structural support systems, and horticultural techniques that pushed the boundaries of ancient technological capabilities. The economic foundations supporting these monumental projects rested upon the tribute and trade revenues generated by Babylonian territorial expansion. Control over major trade routes connecting the Persian Gulf with Mediterranean markets provided customs revenues and commercial opportunities that enriched both royal treasuries and private merchants. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency systems across Babylonian territories facilitated commerce while reducing transaction costs for long-distance traders. The integration of deportee populations into Babylonian economic life created additional sources of productivity and innovation. Hebrew craftsmen contributed techniques for metalworking and textile production, while Phoenician artisans brought expertise in glassmaking and purple dye manufacturing. This cultural and technological exchange enriched Babylonian material culture, while providing economic opportunities for displaced populations who might otherwise have remained sources of political instability. Agricultural productivity within core Babylonian territories increased substantially during this period through investments in irrigation infrastructure and the introduction of new crops and farming techniques learned from conquered territories. The systematic development of canal networks not only improved crop yields, but also provided employment for large numbers of workers whose labour might otherwise have been directed toward potentially destabilizing activities. The administration of this expanding empire required sophisticated bureaucratic systems that could manage complex relationships between central authority and local governance structures across diverse cultural and geographic regions. Nebuchadnezzar's officials developed standardized procedures for tax collection, legal disputes, and military recruitment, while maintaining flexibility to accommodate local customs and conditions that varied significantly across the empire's vast territories. The systematic deportation policies implemented by Nebuchadnezzar following the conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BC represented a calculated approach to imperial administration that differed significantly from earlier Assyrian practices. While Assyrian deportations had often involved wholesale population transfers, designed primarily to prevent rebellion through cultural disruption, Babylonian policies demonstrated greater sophistication in selecting specific demographic groups whose removal would serve multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. The Babylonian administration conducted detailed surveys of conquered populations before implementing deportation orders. Royal officials compiled lists identifying skilled craftsmen, religious leaders, military officers, wealthy merchants, and members of royal families whose continued presence in their homeland might facilitate resistance activities. Archaeological evidence from the Babylonian administrative archives reveals meticulous record-keeping that tracked individual deportees by profession, family connections, and potential value to imperial construction projects. The selection criteria for Jewish deportees reflected deep understanding of Hebrew society's power structures. Babylonian administrators recognized that removing the educated elite would effectively decapitate potential resistance movements while preserving the agricultural workforce necessary for maintaining territorial productivity. Priests, scribes, and temple officials received particular attention since their religious authority could potentially mobilize popular opposition to foreign rule. Similarly, skilled metalworkers and stonemasons were prioritized for deportation due to their value in ongoing Babylonian construction projects and their potential military applications in fortification work. The physical process of deportation involved careful logistical planning to minimize mortality during the lengthy journey to Babylonia. Unlike earlier mass deportations that had resulted in catastrophic population losses, Babylonian officials provided adequate provisions and medical care to ensure that valuable human resources arrived in serviceable condition. Deportee groups travelled in organised caravans with military escorts, interpreters, and administrative personnel responsible for maintaining order and addressing practical needs during the journey. Upon arrival in Babylonia, deportee communities received land allocations in designated settlement areas that facilitated both integration and supervision. The most significant Jewish settlement developed around the Shebar Canal near Nippur, approximately 60 kilometers southeast of Babylon. This location provided access to fertile agricultural land while maintaining sufficient distance from the capital to prevent potential security concerns. The canal system supplied reliable water sources for both irrigation and transportation, enabling deportee communities to establish economically viable settlements. The administrative structure governing deportee communities represented a compromise between imperial control and cultural autonomy. Babylonian officials appointed governors and tax collectors to oversee territorial administration and ensure compliance with imperial obligations, while allowing deportee communities to maintain their own internal governance systems for managing local disputes and religious affairs. This arrangement reduced administrative costs while providing deportees with incentives to cooperate with Babylonian authority rather than plotting resistance. Economic integration of deportee populations proceeded through carefully managed programs that utilized their specialized skills while preventing the formation of potentially dangerous concentrations of displaced persons. Jewish metalworkers found employment in royal workshops producing weapons, tools, and decorative objects for palace construction projects. Scribes and educated individuals received positions in the imperial bureaucracy, where their literacy skills and knowledge of multiple languages proved valuable for managing correspondence with the distant provinces. The Murasu archive, discovered at Nippur and dating to the late 5th and early 4th centuries BC, provides detailed documentation of how deportee communities evolved economically over time. These cuneiform tablets reveal that many Jewish families had acquired substantial landholdings and engaged in complex business relationships with Babylonian partners. Some deportees achieved positions of considerable influence within the imperial administration, while others established successful commercial enterprises that contributed significantly to regional economic development. Cultural exchanges between Babylonian and deportee populations occurred through multiple channels that transformed both communities in fundamental ways. Jewish exposure to Babylonian religious practices, literary traditions, and scientific knowledge profoundly influenced the development of Hebrew theology and intellectual culture. The sophisticated astronomical observations conducted by Babylonian priests introduced Jewish scholars to mathematical concepts and calendrical systems that would later influence rabbinic literature and religious practice. The Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, provided narrative frameworks that influenced Jewish theological development during the exile period. While Jewish religious leaders maintained strict monotheistic beliefs, they adapted Babylonian literary techniques and mythological motifs to express Hebrew theological concepts in forms that resonated with broader Near Eastern cultural traditions. This adaptive process enabled Jewish communities to maintain their religious identity while participating effectively in the multicultural environment of the Babylonian Empire. Babylonian legal traditions also influenced Jewish jurisprudence during the exile period. The Code of Hammurabi and subsequent Babylonian legal developments provided models for systematic legal reasoning that influenced the development of Jewish legal literature. The casuistic approach, characteristic of Babylonian law, which analysed specific cases to establish general principles, became a fundamental feature of rabbinic legal methodology that emerged during and after the exile period. The development of synagogue institutions during the Babylonian exile represented a revolutionary adaptation to circumstances where traditional temple-based worship was impossible. These local religious assemblies enabled Jewish communities to maintain their religious practices and cultural identity without access to the Jerusalem temple. The synagogue system provided frameworks for religious education, community governance, and cultural preservation that proved crucial for Jewish survival during the exile and subsequent periods of dispersion. Aramaic emerged as the dominant lingua franca throughout the Neo-Babylonian Empire due to practical administrative necessities and the cultural diversity of imperial territories. The language's widespread adoption reflected both its utility for intergroup communication and the Babylonian administration's pragmatic approach to managing multilingual populations. Unlike previous empires that had attempted to impose their own languages upon conquered territories, Babylonian administrators recognized that adopting an existing lingua franca would facilitate more efficient governance while reducing cultural resistance. The origins of Aramaic as a regional lingua franca predated the Neo-Babylonian period, but imperial administrative practices accelerated its adoption across diverse territories. Aramean merchants had established trading networks throughout the Levant and Mesopotamia during the preceding centuries, creating commercial relationships that required standardized communication methods. The Babylonian imperial administration built upon these existing linguistic foundations by adopting Aramaic for official correspondence with provincial governors and local administrators. Administrative documents from various Neo-Babylonian sites reveal the systematic use of Aramaic for interregional communication, while Akkadian remained the primary language for internal Babylonian governmental functions. This bilingual approach enabled imperial administrators to communicate effectively with diverse populations while maintaining traditional Mesopotamian administrative practices within core territorial regions. The practical advantages of this system became apparent in the speed and accuracy of communications between the capital and distant provinces. The adoption of Aramaic alphabetic script alongside traditional cuneiform writing systems represented a significant technological advancement that improved administrative efficiency throughout the empire. Alphabetic writing required fewer symbols and could be learned more quickly than cuneiform, enabling the training of larger numbers of scribes and administrators. This expanded literacy facilitated more detailed record-keeping and more frequent communication between administrative levels. Archaeological evidence from sites across the former Neo-Babylonian Empire demonstrates the widespread use of Aramaic in both official and private contexts. Ostraka discovered at various locations contain Aramaic inscriptions recording commercial transactions, personal correspondence, and administrative orders. These finds indicate that Aramaic usage extended beyond formal governmental functions to encompass daily commercial and social interactions among diverse population groups. The influence of Aramaic on local languages throughout the empire created lasting linguistic changes that persisted long after the fall of Babylonian political authority. Hebrew texts from the exile period show increasing Aramaic influence in vocabulary, syntax, and idiomatic expressions. This linguistic evolution reflected the practical necessities of daily life in multilingual communities, where Aramaic served as the primary medium for intergroup communication. Religious literature produced during the Neo-Babylonian period also demonstrates the influence of Aramaic as a lingua franca. Parts of the biblical books of Daniel and Ezra were composed in Aramaic, reflecting the language's importance in Jewish intellectual and religious life during the exile. The use of Aramaic for religious texts indicated its acceptance as a legitimate medium for expressing sacred concepts, despite its foreign origins. Archaeological investigations at multiple Neo-Babylonian sites have revealed extensive evidence of multicultural communities and their integration into imperial society. Excavations at Babylon itself have uncovered residential districts where material remains indicate the presence of diverse ethnic groups living in close proximity. Pottery styles, architectural features, and burial practices from these areas show clear influences from various cultural traditions, suggesting substantial interaction between different population groups. The Ishtar Gate area excavations have yielded artifacts demonstrating the cosmopolitan character of Neo-Babylonian urban centres. Seal impressions found in administrative contexts bear names and titles indicating the presence of officials from various ethnic backgrounds, including Babylonians, Assyrians, Arameans, and deportees from conquered territories. These seals often combine traditional Mesopotamian iconographic elements with motifs derived from other cultural traditions, illustrating the synthetic nature of imperial administrative culture. Residential areas near the processional way have provided evidence of wealthy households that incorporated architectural and decorative elements from multiple cultural sources. Building techniques characteristic of Phoenician construction appear alongside traditional Babylonian methods, while decorative motifs show influences from various artistic traditions. These archaeological findings suggest that cultural integration extended beyond administrative necessity to encompass aesthetic and lifestyle preferences among urban populations. Cemetery excavations at various Neo-Babylonian sites reveal burial practices that combine elements from different cultural traditions while maintaining distinct ethnic identities. Some graves contain traditional Mesopotamian burial goods alongside objects characteristic of other cultural groups, suggesting individuals who participated in multiple cultural systems simultaneously. Other burials maintain strictly traditional practices, indicating that cultural integration occurred selectively rather than through wholesale assimilation. The economic integration of multicultural communities appears clearly in archaeological evidence from commercial districts. Workshops and storage facilities show evidence of production techniques and raw materials derived from various regions of the empire. Phoenician purple dye production facilities operated alongside traditional Mesopotamian textile workshops, while metalworking areas show evidence of techniques characteristic of different cultural traditions. This economic diversity contributed to technological innovation and increased productivity within imperial territories. Religious syncretism also appears in archaeological evidence from temple complexes and household shrines. While major temples maintained traditional Mesopotamian religious practices, smaller religious installations show evidence of hybrid practices that incorporated elements from various cultural traditions. Figurines and religious objects found in residential contexts demonstrate how individual households adapted their religious practices to accommodate multiple cultural influences while maintaining core religious identities. The administrative records discovered at various sites provide detailed documentation of how multicultural integration functioned at practical levels. Tax records list individuals with names indicating diverse ethnic origins, holding similar economic and social positions within imperial society. Legal documents record business partnerships, marriage contracts, and property transactions between individuals from different cultural backgrounds, suggesting that ethnic diversity did not prevent normal social and economic relationships. Military organisation within the Neo-Babylonian Empire also reflected multicultural integration policies. Administrative texts describe military units composed of soldiers from various ethnic backgrounds serving under unified command structures. These mixed units apparently functioned effectively in imperial military campaigns, suggesting that cultural diversity was successfully managed through professional military discipline and shared strategic objectives. The integration of deportee populations into imperial military service provided both practical benefits and potential security risks that Babylonian administrators managed through careful personnel policies. Deportees with military experience received opportunities to serve in imperial forces, but usually in units stationed far from their original homelands to prevent potential collaboration with local resistance movements. This approach utilized valuable military expertise while minimizing security concerns. Educational institutions within the empire also demonstrate multicultural integration through curriculum content and student populations. Scribal schools trained students from various ethnic backgrounds in multiple languages and writing systems, preparing them for administrative careers that required communication across cultural boundaries. The preservation of diverse literary traditions within these educational systems contributed to the cultural richness that characterized Neo-Babylonian civilization. The religious landscape of the Neo-Babylonian Empire centered fundamentally around Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon whose elevation to supreme godhead paralleled the city's rise to imperial dominance. This divine ascendancy was not merely symbolic, but formed the ideological cornerstone upon which Nebuchadnezzar and his successors justified their rule over diverse populations spanning from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast. Marduk's supremacy represented more than traditional Mesopotamian polytheism. It embodied a sophisticated theological framework that legitimized imperial authority, while accommodating the religious diversity inherent in governing multi-ethnic territories. The theological development of Marduk's supreme status had evolved over centuries of Babylonian political history, but reached its definitive form during the Neo-Babylonian period through deliberate royal patronage and priestly elaboration. The Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, provided the mythological foundation for Marduk's cosmic authority by describing his victory over primordial chaos forces and his subsequent appointment as king of the gods by divine assembly. This narrative served dual purposes. It explained the natural order of the universe while simultaneously justifying Babylonian political hegemony as a reflection of divine will. Royal inscriptions from Nebuchadnezzar's reign consistently emphasized the king's role as Marduk's chosen representative on earth, appointed to maintain cosmic order through just governance and proper religious observance. These texts describe the monarch as beloved of Marduk and shepherd of the people, employing traditional Mesopotamian royal ideology while adapting it to imperial circumstances. The king's authority derived not from mere military conquest but from divine sanction, making rebellion against Babylonian rule tantamount to opposing the cosmic order itself. The physical representation of Marduk's supremacy manifested most dramatically in the Assyrian temple complex, which served as both the god's primary residence and the ceremonial heart of the empire. Archaeological excavations have revealed a massive temple precinct covering approximately 40 hectares within Babylon's sacred district, with the central ziggurat Etemenanki rising to an estimated height of 91 meters above the surrounding plain. The temple's construction and maintenance required enormous resources drawn from throughout the empire, demonstrating the material commitment to Marduk's worship that underpinned imperial ideology. The Esagila temple housed Marduk's primary cult statue, crafted from precious metals and adorned with jewels collected as tribute from subject territories. Contemporary descriptions indicate that this statue stood approximately 1.8 meters tall and was fashioned from gold with clothing of finest textiles, dyed with expensive purple and blue pigments. The statue's presence within the temple was considered essential for the god's earthly residence, making its protection a paramount concern for imperial security. During periods of political instability, the removal or capture of this statue could symbolically undermine royal legitimacy. The economic power of Marduk's temple represented a significant component of imperial administration, with the Assyrian complex controlling vast agricultural estates, commercial enterprises, and craft workshops throughout Babylonian territories. Temple archives record extensive landholdings worked by dependent labourers, including deportees from conquered territories who provided specialised skills in agriculture, manufacturing, and construction. These economic activities generated substantial revenues that supported both religious ceremonies and imperial administrative functions. The annual Akitu festival represented the most important religious celebration in the Neo-Babylonian calendar, serving simultaneously as a renewal of cosmic order, a legitimization of royal authority, and a demonstration of imperial unity. This 12-day festival, held during the spring month of Nisanu, brought together representatives from throughout the empire to participate in elaborate ceremonies that reaffirmed Babylonian political and religious supremacy. The festival's complex ritual structure combined ancient Mesopotamian traditions with innovations designed to accommodate the empire's multicultural character. The Akitu festival began with purification ceremonies conducted by high priests within the Assyrian temple complex. These initial rituals involved the cleansing of temple spaces, the preparation of sacred objects, and the performance of incantations designed to banish evil influences from the coming year. The king played a central role in these ceremonies, undergoing ritual humiliation before Marduk's statue that symbolically removed the accumulated sins and failures of the previous year. This dramatic ceremony emphasized the monarch's dependence upon divine favor, while simultaneously demonstrating his unique relationship with the supreme deity. The festival's climactic moments occurred on the fourth day with the public recitation of the Enuma Elish, creation epic within the Assyrian temple. This recitation served multiple functions. It renewed the cosmic order by retelling the story of Marduk's victory over chaos. It educated participants in proper theological understanding, and it provided a shared cultural experience that transcended ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Professional reciters trained in proper pronunciation and dramatic presentation performed the epic before audiences that included royal officials, foreign diplomats, and representatives from subject territories. The procession of Marduk's statue from the Assyrian to the Bit-Akitu temple outside Babylon's walls represented the festival's most spectacular public display. This ceremony involved the careful transport of the god's cult statue along the processional way, accompanied by elaborate musical performances, incense burning, and the participation of thousands of worshippers from throughout the empire. The procession route passed through the Ishtar Gate and along the magnificent avenue decorated with glazed brick reliefs, depicting lions sacred to various deities, creating a visual narrative of divine power and imperial grandeur. The Bit-Akitu temple, located approximately 1.5 kilometers north of Babylon's walls, served as the destination for Marduk's ceremonial journey and the site for crucial rituals that determined the empire's fate for the coming year. Archaeological investigations have revealed a substantial temple complex with multiple courtyards, ceremonial halls, and accommodation facilities for festival participants. The temple's architectural program emphasized themes of cosmic renewal and royal legitimacy through decorative motifs and spatial arrangements designed to facilitate large-scale ceremonial activities. Within the Bit-Akitu temple, the king underwent the crucial ceremony of taking Marduk's hand, a ritual that symbolically renewed the divine covenant between the deity and the royal dynasty. This ceremony required the monarch to approach Marduk's statue in a prescribed manner, recite traditional formulas acknowledging his dependence upon divine favour, and receive symbolic confirmation of his continued right to rule. The ritual's performance before assembled representatives from throughout the empire provided public validation of royal authority while creating opportunities for diplomatic communication between central administration and provincial leaders. The festival's conclusion involved the ceremonial return of Marduk's statue to the Esagila temple, accompanied by additional processions and ceremonies that emphasized themes of cosmic order and imperial stability. These final rituals included the performance of the sacred marriage ceremony, in which the king symbolically united with a goddess representing fertility and abundance, ensuring the empire's prosperity for the coming year. This ancient Mesopotamian tradition received renewed emphasis during the Neo-Babylonian period, as a means of demonstrating continuity with earlier civilizations while adapting traditional practices to imperial circumstances. The administrative complexity of organizing the Akitu festival required sophisticated coordination between religious and secular authorities throughout the empire. Temple officials worked with royal administrators to arrange transportation, accommodation, and security for thousands of participants travelling from distant provinces. Provincial governors received detailed instructions regarding their territory's contributions to festival expenses, including specific requirements for tribute offerings, ceremonial objects, and participant delegations that would represent their regions during the celebrations. The economic impact of the Akitu festival extended far beyond immediate ceremonial expenses to encompass broader patterns of trade, craft production, and agricultural planning throughout the empire. Artisans throughout Babylonian territories increased production of luxury goods, ceremonial objects, and decorative materials needed for festival preparations. Agricultural communities coordinated harvest schedules to ensure adequate food supplies for festival participants, while merchants organised supply networks to transport goods from distant provinces to the capital city. The festival also served important diplomatic functions by providing opportunities for face-to-face meetings between imperial administrators and provincial representatives. These interactions facilitated the resolution of administrative disputes, the negotiation of tribute arrangements, and the exchange of information regarding local conditions throughout the empire. Foreign ambassadors attending the festival gained first-hand exposure to Babylonian wealth and organisational capabilities, contributing to the empire's diplomatic influence throughout the ancient Near East. The priestly hierarchy responsible for managing Marduk's cult and the broader temple administration represented one of the most powerful institutional forces within Neo-Babylonian society. The High Priest of Marduk, known as the Sesgalu, held a position of enormous influence that extended far beyond purely religious functions to encompass significant roles in imperial administration, economic management, and diplomatic relations. This office required individuals of exceptional education, administrative capability, and political acumen who could manage complex relationships between religious tradition and imperial policy. The Sesgalu's responsibilities included oversight of temple finances, supervision of religious ceremonies, management of temple personnel, and coordination with royal officials on matters affecting imperial policy. The position required mastery of traditional Mesopotamian religious knowledge, including the proper performance of complex rituals, the interpretation of omens and divine signs, and the maintenance of temple archives containing centuries of accumulated religious and administrative documents. These archives represented crucial repositories of knowledge that supported both religious practice and governmental administration. Beneath the high priest, the temple hierarchy included numerous specialized positions, responsible for different aspects of religious and administrative functions. The Sangu priests managed specific temple departments, including agricultural estates, craft workshops, and commercial enterprises that generated revenues for religious activities. These positions required both religious training and practical administrative skills, as temple priests often served simultaneously as religious officials and business managers overseeing complex economic operations. The Kalu priests specialized in musical performance and lamentation rituals that formed essential components of major religious ceremonies. These individuals underwent extensive training in traditional Mesopotamian musical traditions, learning to perform complex compositions that accompanied various ritual activities. Their performances during the Akitu festival and other major celebrations provided emotional and spiritual experiences that enhanced the psychological impact of religious ceremonies on participants from throughout the empire. The Baru priests practiced divination through various methods, including the examination of sacrificial animal entrails, the observation of astronomical phenomena, and the interpretation of unusual natural events. These specialists provided crucial services to both religious and secular authorities by offering insights into divine will regarding important political and military decisions. Their pronouncements carried significant weight in imperial decision-making processes, as Mesopotamian rulers traditionally sought divine guidance before undertaking major initiatives. The economic power of temple institutions extended throughout Neo-Babylonian territories through extensive networks of agricultural estates, commercial enterprises, and financial operations that rivaled royal resources in scope and influence. Temple land holdings included some of the most productive agricultural areas in Mesopotamia, worked by dependent labourers who provided both agricultural products and specialised services to support religious activities. These estates employed sophisticated irrigation systems, crop rotation practices, and livestock management techniques that maximise productivity while maintaining long-term sustainability. Temple workshops produced a wide range of goods including textiles, metalwork, pottery, and luxury items that serve both religious and commercial purposes. The Esagila temple complex housed specialized workshops where skilled craftsmen created ceremonial objects, architectural decorations, and trade goods that generated substantial revenues for temple operations. These workshops employed techniques passed down through generations of Mesopotamian artisans while incorporating innovations learned from craftsmen throughout the empire's diverse territories. The temple's financial operations included lending activities that provided credit to merchants, farmers, and other economic actors throughout Babylonian territories. Temple archives contain thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting loans, interest payments, and business partnerships that illustrate the sophisticated financial services provided by religious institutions. These activities generated additional revenues while supporting broader economic development throughout the empire by providing access to capital for productive investments. The integration of local deities and religious practices throughout the empire's provinces represented a crucial aspect of Neo-Babylonian religious policy that facilitated political stability while accommodating cultural diversity. Rather than attempting to impose uniform religious practices upon conquered territories, Babylonian administrators adopted flexible approaches that recognized local deities while establishing their subordination to Marduk's supreme authority. This syncretistic policy reduced religious resistance to imperial rule while creating opportunities for cultural exchange that enriched Babylonian religious traditions. The theological framework supporting this religious syncretism drew upon ancient Mesopotamian traditions that recognized the existence of multiple deities with specialized functions and territorial associations. Babylonian theologians developed sophisticated explanations for how local deities related to the broader pantheon headed by Marduk, often identifying foreign gods as alternative names or manifestations of established Mesopotamian deities. This approach allowed conquered populations to maintain their traditional religious practices while acknowledging Babylonian religious supremacy. Archaeological evidence from various provincial sites demonstrates how this syncretistic approach functioned in practice. Temple complexes in former Assyrian territories show evidence of architectural modifications that accommodated both traditional local practices and new Babylonian religious requirements. Inscriptions from these sites often invoke both local deities and Marduk in the same texts, illustrating how religious practitioners navigated between different theological systems while maintaining their cultural identities. The religious practices of deportee communities within Babylonia proper provide additional examples of successful religious syncretism under imperial oversight. Jewish communities maintained their monotheistic beliefs while adapting their religious practices to accommodate life in a polytheistic environment. Archaeological evidence from Jewish settlement areas shows the development of new religious institutions and practices that preserved Hebrew religious identity while enabling participation in broader imperial society. The influence of Babylonian religious practices on deportee communities also appears in various forms of cultural adaptation and theological development. Jewish exposure to Babylonian creation myths, flood narratives, and legal traditions contributed to the development of Hebrew religious literature that incorporated Mesopotamian literary techniques while maintaining distinctly Jewish theological perspectives. This cultural exchange enriched both traditions while demonstrating the creative possibilities inherent in religious syncretism under imperial conditions. The transformation of Babylon into the ancient world's most magnificent capital city began with Nebuchadnezzar's accession to the throne in 605 BC and continued throughout his 43-year reign, fundamentally altering both the physical landscape of Mesopotamia and contemporary understanding of urban planning possibilities. The scale of construction undertaken during this period dwarfed previous Mesopotamian building projects and established architectural precedents that influenced urban development throughout the ancient Near East for centuries afterward. The systematic approach to city planning implemented by Nebuchadnezzar's architects and engineers reflected not merely royal ambition, but sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering, defensive strategy, and the psychological impact of monumental architecture upon both residents and foreign visitors. The reconstruction of Babylon's defensive perimeter represented the most ambitious fortification project ever attempted in ancient Mesopotamia, involving the complete rebuilding of the city's walls to accommodate massive population growth and incorporate advanced military technologies developed through centuries of siege warfare experience. The new fortification system consisted of multiple defensive lines, extending across approximately 18 kilometers of perimeter, with the outer walls reaching heights of 25 meters and widths sufficient to accommodate chariot traffic along their summits. Archaeological investigations have revealed that these walls incorporated sophisticated architectural features, including projecting towers spaced at regular intervals, carefully designed gates with multiple defensive chambers, and underground passages that enable defenders to move safely between different sections of the fortification system. The construction techniques employed in these defensive walls demonstrated remarkable engineering sophistication, combining traditional Mesopotamian building methods with innovations developed specifically for the Babylon project. The wall foundations extended up to 10 meters below ground level, constructed from carefully fitted stone blocks that provided stable bases for the massive mud brick superstructures. These foundations included drainage systems designed to prevent water damage from seasonal flooding and underground seepage that could undermine structural integrity. The mud brick portions of the walls employed standardized brick sizes and specialized mortar compositions that provided exceptional durability while allowing for rapid construction using large numbers of workers. The famous double wall system that surrounded Babylon's inner city represented a revolutionary approach to urban fortification that influenced defensive architecture throughout the ancient world. The inner wall, known as Imgur-Enlil, stood approximately 21 meters high and was constructed entirely of fired brick for maximum durability. The outer wall, called Nemeti-Enlil, reached heights of 25 meters and was built primarily of mud brick with fired brick facings in critical areas. The space between these walls, measuring approximately 23 meters in width, was filled with rubble and earth to create a massive defensive barrier that could absorb the impact of siege engines while providing elevated positions for defensive artillery. The Ishtar Gate represented the architectural pinnacle of Neo-Babylonian defensive construction, combining military functionality with unprecedented artistic achievement to create a structure that served simultaneously as fortress entrance and ceremonial monument. The gate's construction required approximately 15 years of continuous work by teams of specialized craftsmen who developed new techniques for manufacturing and installing the glazed brick reliefs that decorated its surfaces. The gate structure itself measured approximately 47 meters in height and incorporated multiple defensive chambers, connected by passages that forced attacking forces to navigate a series of killing zones under constant defensive fire from elevated positions. The glazed brick technology employed in the Ishtar Gate's decoration represented a significant advancement in ceramic manufacturing that required innovations in kiln design, pigment chemistry, and installation techniques. The brilliant blue background colour was achieved through the use of lapis lazuli-based pigments imported from Afghanistan, while the relief figures of dragons and bulls were created using gold and white glazes that required precise temperature control during firing. The manufacturing process involved creating individual bricks with portions of relief figures that had to be carefully coordinated to ensure proper alignment when installed in the wall structure. This technique required unprecedented precision in both manufacturing and construction that demonstrated the high level of technical expertise available to Nebuchadnezzar's craftsmen. The processional way, extending from the Ishtar Gate toward Babylon's ceremonial centre, represented another remarkable achievement in urban planning and architectural decoration that created a magnificent avenue for religious festivals and royal ceremonies. The roadway measured approximately 1.2 kilometers in length and 20 meters in width, paved with specially manufactured bricks that were designed to withstand heavy traffic from ceremonial processions and military parades. The street's construction required extensive excavation and grading to create a level surface with proper drainage, while its borders were lined with walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting lions sacred to the goddess Ishtar. The engineering challenges involved in constructing the processional way included the installation of sophisticated drainage systems that prevented water accumulation during Mesopotamia's seasonal rains, while maintaining the structural integrity of the roadway's foundations. Underground channels constructed beneath the street surface collected rainwater and directed it toward the Euphrates River through carefully designed outlets that prevented erosion damage to nearby structures. The roadway's surface incorporated slight crowning that encouraged water runoff while maintaining comfortable conditions for pedestrian and vehicular traffic during ceremonial events. The architectural program of the processional way extended beyond mere transportation functionality to encompass complex symbolic meanings that reinforced Babylonian imperial ideology through visual narrative. The lion reliefs decorating the street's walls were arranged in processional sequences that created the impression of divine guardians accompanying visitors toward the city's sacred precincts. These decorative elements employed the same glazed brick technology used in the Ishtar Gate, but incorporated different colour schemes and artistic motifs that created visual variety while maintaining overall design coherence. The psychological impact of walking along this magnificent avenue, flanked by towering walls decorated with supernatural guardians, contributed significantly to Babylon's reputation as the world's most impressive city. The legendary Hanging Gardens, while their precise historical existence remains debated among modern scholars, represented the pinnacle of Neo-Babylonian hydraulic engineering and horticultural achievement according to contemporary accounts by visitors from throughout the ancient world. Classical sources describe elaborate terraced gardens, rising to heights that provided views across the Mesopotamian plain, supported by sophisticated irrigation systems that lifted water from the Euphrates River through mechanical devices operated by human labour. The technical challenges involved in such construction would have required innovations in structural engineering, water management, and plant cultivation that pushed the boundaries of ancient technological capabilities. Archaeological investigations at various locations within ancient Babylon have revealed evidence of sophisticated hydraulic systems that could potentially have supported the type of elevated irrigation described in classical accounts of the Hanging Gardens. Excavations in the palace complex area have uncovered elaborate water channels, storage systems, and mechanical installations that demonstrate the advanced engineering capabilities available to Nebuchadnezzar's architects. These systems incorporated bronze and lead piping, mechanical pumping devices, and carefully designed distribution networks that could have supplied water to elevated garden installations while maintaining adequate pressure for effective irrigation. The horticultural aspects of the Hanging Gardens project would have required extensive knowledge of plant cultivation techniques adapted to Mesopotamian climatic conditions while incorporating exotic species imported from throughout the empire's territories. Contemporary accounts describe gardens containing trees and plants from various regions including Lebanon, Iran and the Mediterranean coast, suggesting systematic efforts to create botanical collections that demonstrated imperial control over diverse geographic regions. The maintenance of such gardens would have required specialized knowledge of soil preparation, irrigation scheduling, and pest management that represented significant advances in ancient agricultural science. The palace complexes constructed during Nebuchadnezzar's reign demonstrated unprecedented scale and architectural sophistication that established new standards for royal residential architecture throughout the ancient Near East. The southern palace, covering approximately 5.2 hectares within Babylon's royal quarter, incorporated multiple courtyards, throne rooms, residential apartments, and administrative facilities that house the complex governmental apparatus of imperial administration. The palace's construction employed the finest materials available throughout the empire, including cedar wood from Lebanon, precious stones from Iran and India, and specialized craftsmen recruited from conquered territories who contributed their distinctive skills to the overall architectural program. The throne room within the southern palace represented the architectural centerpiece of Neo-Babylonian royal architecture, designed to overwhelm visitors with displays of imperial wealth and power while providing appropriate settings for diplomatic ceremonies and royal audiences. The hall measured approximately 52 meters in length and 17 meters in width, with ceilings reaching heights of over 20 meters, supported by massive columns decorated with glazed brick capitals featuring palmette and lotus motifs. The walls were decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting royal hunting scenes, divine symbols, and tribute processions that created visual narratives of imperial achievement and divine sanction for Babylonian rule. The residential portions of the palace complex incorporated sophisticated environmental control systems that provided comfortable living conditions despite Mesopotamia's extreme seasonal temperature variations. Architectural features included thick walls with air circulation chambers, elevated floors that promoted air movement, and strategically placed windows that maximized natural lighting while minimizing heat gain during summer months. The palace also incorporated elaborate bathing facilities with heated water systems and decorative pools that demonstrated the luxury lifestyle available to Neo-Babylonian royalty and high officials. The administrative sections of the palace complex housed the governmental departments responsible for managing the empire's vast territories and diverse populations. These areas included archives for storing thousands of cuneiform tablets, documenting administrative correspondence, legal proceedings, and economic transactions throughout imperial territories. Specialized workshops within the palace produced royal seals, ceremonial objects, and luxury goods that serve both practical administrative functions and diplomatic purposes in maintaining relationships with foreign powers and provincial governors. The Northern Palace, constructed later in Nebuchadnezzar's reign, represented further developments in Neo-Babylonian architectural design that incorporated lessons learned from earlier construction projects while exploring new possibilities in residential and ceremonial architecture. This complex covered approximately 4.1 hectares and featured innovative architectural elements including suspended gardens, elaborate water features and decorative programs that combined traditional Mesopotamian motifs with artistic influences from throughout the empire's multicultural territories. The ziggurat Etemenanki, rebuilt during Nebuchadnezzar's reign to serve as the architectural focal point of Marduk's temple complex, represented the culmination of over 2 millennia of Mesopotamian temple architecture while incorporating construction techniques and decorative elements that reflected Neo-Babylonian architectural innovations. The structure rose to an estimated height of 91 meters above the surrounding plain through 7 distinct levels, each smaller than the one below and connected by external staircases that enabled ritual processions to reach the temple shrine at the summit. The ziggurat's construction required approximately 85 million fired bricks and represented one of the largest construction projects ever undertaken in the ancient world. The engineering challenges involved in constructing a Temenanki included the creation of stable foundations, capable of supporting the enormous weight of the superstructure, while preventing settlement that could cause structural failure. Archaeological investigations have revealed that the foundation platform extended approximately 15 meters below ground level and incorporated sophisticated drainage systems designed to prevent water damage from seasonal flooding. The foundation construction employed alternating layers of reed matting and bitumen that provided flexible support while distributing structural loads across the underlying soil. The ziggurat's architectural program incorporated complex symbolic meanings that reinforced its function as a connection between earthly and divine realms, while demonstrating Babylonian engineering capabilities to visitors from throughout the known world. Each level of the structure was decorated with glazed brick facings in different colours that created a rainbow effect visible from great distances across the Mesopotamian plain. The shrine at the summit housed Marduk's secondary cult statue and provided a setting for religious ceremonies that required elevation above the surrounding urban landscape. The urban planning principles implemented throughout Babylon during the Neo-Babylonian period reflected sophisticated understanding of traffic flow, residential zoning, and commercial organisation that created efficient urban environments while maintaining appropriate separation between different functional areas. The city's street system incorporated both major arterial roads connecting important districts and smaller residential streets that provided access to neighbourhood areas while maintaining privacy for residential inhabitants. The street network was designed to facilitate the movement of large ceremonial processions while accommodating normal commercial and residential traffic patterns. The residential districts of Neo-Babylonian Babylon demonstrated systematic urban planning that provided appropriate housing for different social and economic groups while maintaining overall urban coherence. Archaeological excavations have revealed well-planned neighbourhoods with standardised house designs that incorporated courtyards, multiple rooms, and sanitary facilities that represented significant advances in urban residential architecture. These houses employed sophisticated construction techniques, including fired brick foundations, mud brick walls with protective plaster coatings, and roofing systems that provided effective protection from weather while maintaining comfortable interior temperatures. The commercial districts of the city incorporated specialised market areas, craft workshops, and warehouse facilities that supported Babylon's role as a major centre of international trade and manufacturing. These areas were strategically located near transportation networks, including river ports, canal connections, and major roadways that facilitated the movement of goods throughout the empire and beyond. The commercial architecture employed standardized building techniques that provided flexible spaces adaptable to various commercial functions while maintaining structural durability under heavy usage conditions. The sophisticated canal system that supplied water to Babylon and surrounding agricultural areas represented one of the most impressive hydraulic engineering achievements of the ancient world, incorporating innovations in water management that enabled the support of urban populations exceeding 200,000 inhabitants, while maintaining agricultural productivity in surrounding regions. The system included major canals connecting Babylon to the Euphrates River, distribution networks that supplied water to different urban districts, and drainage channels that prevented flooding during seasonal high water periods. The engineering principles employed in Babylon's canal system demonstrated advanced understanding of hydraulic engineering that enabled precise control of water flow rates, distribution patterns, and seasonal variations in water availability. The canals incorporated sophisticated lock systems that maintained appropriate water levels while enabling boat traffic between different elevation zones. These engineering features required precise construction techniques and ongoing maintenance programs that employed thousands of workers in specialized hydraulic engineering tasks. The agricultural implications of Babylon's canal system extended far beyond urban water supply to encompass irrigation networks that supported intensive agricultural production in surrounding regions. These irrigation systems enabled multiple cropping seasons per year while maintaining soil fertility through controlled flooding that deposited nutrient-rich sediments on agricultural fields. The increased agricultural productivity supported larger urban populations while generating surplus production that could be exported to other regions or stored for use during periods of reduced agricultural output. Provincial urban centres throughout the Neo-Babylonian Empire demonstrated systematic application of architectural and urban planning principles developed in the capital city while adapting to local conditions and cultural traditions that varied significantly across the empire's diverse territories. Cities such as Sippar, Nippur, and Uruk received substantial investments in infrastructure development that improved their administrative capabilities while enhancing their roles as regional centres for trade, religious activities, and cultural exchange. The administrative architecture constructed in provincial centres reflected standardized governmental requirements while incorporating local architectural traditions that maintained cultural continuity for regional populations. These buildings typically included governors' residences, administrative offices, archive facilities, and ceremonial spaces that enabled effective imperial administration while respecting local customs and religious practices. The construction techniques employed in these buildings combined Neo-Babylonian engineering innovations with traditional local methods that utilized readily available materials and established craft traditions. The commercial infrastructure developed in provincial centres facilitated increased trade volumes and improved economic integration throughout imperial territories while supporting local economic development that benefited regional populations. New market facilities, warehouse complexes, and transportation networks connected provincial centres more effectively with the capital city and with each other, creating economic opportunities that encourage population growth and urban development. These improvements contributed to the overall prosperity of imperial territories while strengthening the economic foundations of Neo-Babylonian political control. The religious architecture constructed in provincial centres demonstrated the successful integration of imperial religious policies with local religious traditions that maintained cultural diversity while acknowledging Babylonian political supremacy. Temple complexes in these cities often incorporated both traditional local religious elements and new features that reflected Neo-Babylonian religious practices, creating architectural syntheses that satisfied both imperial requirements and local religious sensibilities. These religious buildings served as focal points for community identity while facilitating the cultural exchange that enriched Neo-Babylonian civilization. Archaeological discoveries at provincial sites have revealed construction techniques and architectural features that demonstrate the widespread dissemination of Neo-Babylonian building technologies throughout imperial territories. Excavations at sites such as Borsippa and Kish have uncovered evidence of sophisticated construction methods, including standardized brick manufacturing, advanced foundation techniques, and decorative programs that show clear influence from capital city architectural developments while maintaining distinctive regional characteristics. The prosperity that enabled Nebuchadnezzar's architectural marvels and sustained the Neo-Babylonian Empire's political dominance rested upon sophisticated economic foundations that transformed Mesopotamia into the ancient world's most productive and commercially integrated region. The empire's wealth derived from multiple interconnected sources, intensive agricultural production made possible by advanced irrigation systems, extensive trade networks that connected distant markets from the Indus Valley to the Nile Delta, innovative banking and financial institutions that facilitated complex commercial transactions, and specialized craft production that created luxury goods coveted throughout the known world. The agricultural systems that sustained Neo-Babylonian civilization represented the culmination of over 3 millennia of Mesopotamian hydraulic engineering and land management expertise. The region's fundamental challenge lay in harnessing the unpredictable flood cycles of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, while preventing the salinization that had periodically devastated earlier agricultural systems. Neo-Babylonian engineers developed sophisticated solutions that maximized agricultural productivity while maintaining long-term environmental sustainability through careful management of water resources and soil conditions. The primary innovation in Neo-Babylonian irrigation involved the construction of massive canal systems that diverted river water into carefully controlled distribution networks serving thousands of square kilometers of agricultural land. The Nahrawan Canal, extending over 400 kilometers from the Tigris River, represented the largest single irrigation project ever undertaken in ancient Mesopotamia. This canal incorporated sophisticated engineering features, including adjustable weirs that regulated water flow according to seasonal variations, settling basins that removed sediment before water reached agricultural fields, and distribution channels that could be opened or closed according to specific crop requirements. The construction of these canal systems required unprecedented coordination between royal administration, local communities, and specialized engineering teams, who possessed detailed knowledge of hydraulic principles and soil conditions throughout different regions. Royal archives contain thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting the planning, construction, and maintenance of irrigation infrastructure, revealing systematic approaches to project management that allocated resources efficiently while ensuring long-term operational effectiveness. These documents indicate that major canal projects typically required 10-15 years for completion and employed thousands of workers, including skilled engineers, experienced construction supervisors, and large numbers of labourers drawn from both free populations and deportee communities. The maintenance of irrigation systems demanded continuous attention to prevent the accumulation of sediment, the growth of aquatic vegetation, and the deterioration of canal walls that could disrupt water flow and reduce agricultural productivity. Neo-Babylonian administrators developed systematic maintenance schedules that assigned specific responsibilities to local communities while providing royal support for major repair projects that exceeded local capabilities. Archaeological evidence from various canal sites reveals sophisticated maintenance techniques, including the use of specialized tools for dredging operations, standardized repair materials that ensured structural compatibility, and quality control procedures that maintained engineering standards across the entire irrigation network. The agricultural productivity achieved through these irrigation systems enabled Neo-Babylonian farmers to support much larger populations than had been possible in earlier periods, while generating substantial surpluses that could be exported to other regions or stored for use during periods of reduced production. Cuneiform records from temple and palace archives document crop yields that frequently exceeded 30-fold returns on seed grain, representing productivity levels that would not be matched in many regions until the introduction of modern agricultural techniques. These exceptional yields resulted from the combination of reliable water supplies, fertile alluvial soils, and sophisticated farming techniques that optimized crop selection and cultivation practices for local conditions. The crop diversity maintained in Neo-Babylonian agriculture provided both nutritional security for local populations and commercial opportunities for export trade with regions that produced different agricultural commodities. Primary grain crops included barley, wheat, and emmer, which formed the staple foods for urban and rural populations, while generating surpluses for export to regions with less favourable agricultural conditions. Date palms, cultivated in extensive orchards throughout southern Mesopotamia, produced both fresh fruit and processed date products that commanded premium prices in international markets due to their exceptional quality and nutritional value. Specialized crops grown for commercial purposes included sesame for oil production, flax for textile manufacturing, and various spices and medicinal plants that supplied both domestic consumption and export trade. The cultivation of these crops required specialized knowledge of soil preparation, planting schedules, and processing techniques that Neo-Babylonian farmers had developed through centuries of experimentation and refinement. Temple archives contain detailed records of agricultural techniques, including crop rotation schedules, fertilization methods, and pest control procedures that maintained high productivity while preventing soil depletion and environmental degradation. Livestock production formed another crucial component of Neo-Babylonian agricultural systems, providing meat, dairy products, leather, and wool for both domestic consumption and commercial trade. Cattle herds grazed in the marshy regions of southern Mesopotamia, where they could access abundant water and vegetation, while producing high-quality beef and dairy products. Sheep and goat flocks were managed through systematic grazing rotations that prevented overuse of pasture lands while maximizing wool and meat production. These livestock operations employed sophisticated breeding programs that improved animal quality while maintaining genetic diversity necessary for long-term herd health. The integration of agricultural and commercial activities created economic opportunities that extended far beyond simple subsistence production to encompass complex business relationships between farmers, merchants, and urban consumers. Many agricultural estates operated as commercial enterprises that employed wage labourers, utilized advanced farming techniques, and marketed their products through established trade networks that connected rural producers with urban markets throughout the empire. These commercial farms often specialized in particular crops or livestock products that commanded premium prices while requiring specialized knowledge and substantial capital investments for optimal production. The commercial networks that connected Neo-Babylonian territories with distant markets represented one of the most sophisticated trading systems ever developed in the ancient world, facilitating the exchange of goods, services, and cultural influences across vast geographic regions that encompass diverse climatic zones, political systems, and cultural traditions. Babylon's strategic location at the convergence of major river systems and overland trade routes enabled Mesopotamian merchants to serve as intermediaries in commercial relationships that connected the Indian Ocean trading system with Mediterranean markets, while providing access to Central Asian products and African luxury goods. The overland trade routes that connected Mesopotamia with distant regions required substantial infrastructure investments, including road construction, bridge building, and the establishment of caravanserai that provided accommodation and security for travelling merchants. The royal road system developed during the Neo-Babylonian period incorporated standardized construction techniques that created reliable transportation networks capable of supporting heavy commercial traffic throughout the year. These roads featured stone paving in critical sections, drainage systems that prevented weather-related disruptions, and strategic placement of way stations that provided rest, resupply, and security services for commercial caravans. The organisation of long-distance trade required sophisticated coordination between merchants, transportation specialists, and governmental authorities who provided security and regulatory oversight for commercial activities that crossed multiple political boundaries. Babylonian merchants developed standardized procedures for organizing trade expeditions, including the procurement of pack animals, the hiring of guards and guides, the negotiation of safe passage agreements with local rulers, and the establishment of commercial partnerships with merchants in distant markets who could facilitate local sales and purchases. The maritime trade connections that linked Mesopotamia with Indian Ocean markets through Persian Gulf ports represented another crucial component of Neo-Babylonian commercial networks. Archaeological excavations at sites such as and Eridu have revealed extensive port facilities that could accommodate large seagoing vessels while providing warehouse space, commercial offices, and residential areas for foreign merchants who established permanent trading relationships with Babylonian partners. These ports handled substantial volumes of luxury goods, including precious stones, exotic spices, fine textiles, and metalwork that commanded premium prices in Babylonian markets, while generating substantial customs revenues for royal treasuries. The Indian Ocean trade networks provided access to products that were unavailable in Mesopotamian territories, including pepper and other spices from South Asia, precious stones such as pearls and sapphires from Ceylon, fine cotton textiles from Indian manufacturing centres, and exotic woods and ivory from African sources. These luxury goods served multiple functions within Neo-Babylonian society. They provided materials for royal and temple ceremonial activities, they supplied raw materials for local craft production, and they created investment opportunities for wealthy individuals who could afford to participate in long-distance commercial ventures. The Mediterranean trade connections, facilitated through Syrian and Phoenician intermediaries, provided access to products from European and North African sources, while creating markets for Mesopotamian exports, including agricultural products, textiles, and manufactured goods. These trade relationships involved complex multilateral arrangements that required careful coordination between Babylonian merchants, Phoenician shipping specialists, and local distributors in various Mediterranean markets. The profits generated from these commercial relationships contributed substantially to the wealth that supported Neo-Babylonian architectural projects and military campaigns, while creating employment opportunities for thousands of individuals involved in production, transportation, and commercial activities. The development of banking houses and sophisticated financial instruments during the Neo-Babylonian period revolutionized commercial practices throughout the ancient Near East by creating mechanisms for managing complex financial transactions that extended across vast distances and lengthy time periods. The Murassu archive and other contemporary business records reveal the existence of private banking establishments that provided services including currency exchange, commercial credit, investment management, and international money transfers that facilitated trade relationships between merchants operating in different regions and political systems. The Ajibi Banking House, whose archives span over 200 years of commercial activities, exemplifies the sophisticated financial services that emerged during the Neo-Babylonian period. This family business provided banking services to clients throughout Babylonian territories, while maintaining correspondent relationships with financial institutions in other regions that enabled complex international transactions. The Ajibi archives contain thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting loan agreements, partnership contracts, real estate transactions, and commercial ventures that illustrate the complexity and scale of Neo-Babylonian financial activities. The banking services provided by these institutions included short-term commercial loans that enabled merchants to finance trade expeditions, Long-term agricultural loans that supported farm development and equipment purchases, and investment partnerships that allowed individuals to participate in commercial ventures without direct involvement in day-to-day operations. Interest rates varied according to risk levels and loan duration, with typical rates ranging from 20% to 33% annually for commercial loans and somewhat lower rates for agricultural loans secured by land or other tangible assets. The development of sophisticated accounting procedures enabled these banking houses to manage complex financial relationships while maintaining accurate records that could be used for legal purposes when disputes arose between business partners. Neo-Babylonian accounting systems employed standardized procedures for recording transactions, calculating interest payments, and tracking the performance of various investments that provided reliable information for business decision-making while creating legal documentation that could be used in court proceedings when necessary. The currency systems employed in Neo-Babylonian commercial transactions combined traditional Mesopotamian weight-based standards with innovations that facilitated exchange calculations and reduced transaction costs for merchants operating across different regions. Silver remained the primary medium of exchange for large transactions, but the standardization of weight measures and purity standards reduced the time and expense required for currency verification, while increasing confidence in commercial transactions between parties who lacked direct personal relationships. The craft production that sustained Neo-Babylonian wealth encompassed diverse industries that created both utilitarian goods for domestic consumption and luxury products that commanded premium prices in international markets. Textile manufacturing represented one of the most important craft industries, employing thousands of workers in activities ranging from fiber production and spinning to weaving and dyeing that created products ranging from simple household fabrics to elaborate ceremonial garments decorated with precious metals and exotic dyes. The wool textile industry utilized the output of extensive sheep flocks maintained throughout Mesopotamian territories while employing sophisticated processing techniques that created high-quality fabric suitable for both domestic use and export trade. Textile workshops employed specialized workers including shearers who harvested wool using techniques that maximized fiber quality, spinners who created threads of consistent thickness and strength, and weavers who operated complex looms capable of producing intricate patterns and designs that demonstrated exceptional artistic and technical skill. The linen textile industry processed flax grown in irrigated fields throughout northern Mesopotamia using techniques that created fine fabrics prized for their durability and comfort in hot climates. The production of high-quality linen required specialized knowledge of plant cultivation, fiber processing, and weaving techniques that had been developed through centuries of experimentation and refinement. Neo-Babylonian linen products competed successfully in international markets against Egyptian products that had previously dominated luxury textile trade throughout the ancient Near East. The dyeing industry created coloured textiles using both locally produced dyes and expensive imported pigments that created colours unavailable through domestic sources. Purple dyes produced from murex shells imported from Mediterranean sources commanded particularly high prices due to their rarity and the complex processing techniques required for their production. These luxury textiles served ceremonial functions in royal and temple contexts, while providing investment opportunities for wealthy individuals who could afford to purchase and trade in high-value textile products. Metalworking industries produced both utilitarian tools and weapons for domestic consumption and luxury goods that served ceremonial functions while demonstrating the technical capabilities of Neo-Babylonian craftsmen. Bronzeworking remained important for producing tools, weapons, and decorative objects, but ironworking became increasingly significant during the Neo-Babylonian period, as improved smelting techniques made iron tools and weapons more readily available for both military and civilian applications. The production of luxury metalwork employed precious metals including gold and silver that were worked into jewellery, ceremonial objects, and decorative elements for architectural applications. These industries employed highly skilled craftsmen who had mastered sophisticated techniques, including casting, hammering, engraving, and inlay work that created products of exceptional artistic and technical quality. The workshops that produced these luxury goods often employed craftsmen from various cultural backgrounds who contributed different technical traditions and artistic styles that enriched Neo-Babylonian material culture, while creating unique, synthetic artistic traditions. The pottery industry produced both utilitarian ceramics for household use and specialized vessels for commercial and ceremonial applications, using techniques that had been refined through millennia of Mesopotamian ceramic production. Neo-Babylonian potters developed improved kiln designs that achieved higher firing temperatures while maintaining better temperature control throughout the firing process, resulting in ceramics of exceptional strength and durability that could withstand the stresses of long-distance transportation while maintaining their functional and aesthetic qualities. The production of glazed ceramics for architectural decoration represented a significant technological achievement that required innovations in kiln design, pigment chemistry, and manufacturing techniques that enabled the creation of the spectacular decorative programs that adorned major Neo-Babylonian buildings. The glazed brick industry employed hundreds of skilled workers who had mastered the complex processes required for producing consistently high-quality glazed products while maintaining the precise dimensional tolerances necessary for architectural applications. The sophisticated administrative apparatus that governed the Neo-Babylonian Empire represented a carefully evolved synthesis of ancient Mesopotamian bureaucratic traditions and innovative solutions designed to manage territories of unprecedented scale and cultural diversity. Unlike the often brutal centralization employed by their Assyrian predecessors, Neo-Babylonian administrators developed flexible governance systems that maintained imperial unity while accommodating regional variations in law, custom, and economic organization. This administrative framework enabled effective control over territories stretching from the Zagros Mountains to the Mediterranean coast while generating the revenues necessary to support massive construction projects and maintain military forces capable of defending imperial frontiers against persistent external threats. The provincial organization established by Nabopolassar and refined by Nebuchadnezzar divided imperial territories into administrative districts that balance practical governance requirements with existing cultural and geographic boundaries. Each province maintained sufficient autonomy to address local conditions while remaining firmly integrated into the broader imperial system through standardized reporting procedures, fiscal obligations, and military service requirements. The boundaries of these provinces reflected careful consideration of natural geographic features, established trade routes, and traditional political divisions that had evolved over centuries of regional development. The appointment of provincial governors represented one of the most crucial aspects of Neo-Babylonian administrative policy, requiring careful selection of individuals who possessed both the administrative competence necessary for effective territorial management and the political reliability essential for maintaining imperial loyalty. These appointments typically involved members of established Babylonian noble families who had demonstrated administrative capability through service in lesser positions, though exceptional circumstances occasionally led to the promotion of capable individuals from conquered territories who had proven their dedication to imperial service through distinguished performance in military or civilian roles. Provincial governors received extensive written instructions that detailed their responsibilities for tax collection, legal administration, military recruitment, and the maintenance of public works projects within their territories. These instructions, preserved in numerous cuneiform tablets discovered at various administrative sites, reveal the systematic approach that characterized Neo-Babylonian governance. governors were expected to submit regular reports documenting economic conditions, security situations, and potential problems that might require intervention from central authorities. The frequency and detail of these reports varied according to the strategic importance of different provinces and their distance from the imperial capital. The administrative staff supporting provincial governors included specialized officials responsible for different aspects of territorial management. Tax collectors, typically drawn from families with established expertise in accounting and financial administration, maintained detailed records of agricultural production, commercial activities, and tribute obligations that formed the basis for fiscal planning throughout the empire. Military commanders, often appointed independently of provincial governors to prevent the concentration of civil and military authority in single individuals, coordinated local defense activities while maintaining direct communication with royal military advisors in Babylon. Legal administrators within each province ensured that judicial proceedings followed established procedures while adapting imperial law to local conditions and customs. These officials required extensive training in both traditional Mesopotamian legal principles and the specific legal traditions of their assigned territories. Their responsibilities included overseeing court proceedings, maintaining legal archives, and coordinating with central authorities when cases involved issues that exceeded provincial jurisdiction or required interpretation of imperial law in novel circumstances. The communication networks that connected provincial administrators with central authorities in Babylon represented one of the most sophisticated information management systems ever developed in the ancient world. The royal road system provided the physical infrastructure for rapid message transmission, while standardized procedures for encoding, transmitting, and verifying official correspondence ensured that critical information reached appropriate recipients without compromise or delay. These communication systems enabled central authorities to maintain detailed awareness of conditions throughout imperial territories, while providing to provincial administrators with timely guidance on policy implementation and crisis response. The construction and maintenance of the royal road network required substantial investments in engineering expertise and ongoing maintenance activities that employed thousands of workers throughout imperial territories. Road construction involved careful surveying to identify optimal routes that minimized travel time while avoiding geographic obstacles that could disrupt communications during adverse weather conditions. The roads incorporated standardized construction techniques, including stone paving in critical sections, drainage systems that prevented weather-related damage, and bridge construction that enabled reliable river crossings throughout the year. Way stations positioned at regular intervals along major routes provided accommodation, fresh horses, and security services for official messengers, while serving as local administrative centres that coordinated regional activities and maintained communication equipment. These facilities typically included residential quarters for permanent staff, stabling for relay animals, workshops for maintaining vehicles and equipment, and archive facilities for storing copies of official correspondence that passed through the station. The strategic placement of these stations enabled official messages to travel from distant provinces to the capital city in remarkably short time periods, often covering distances of several hundred kilometres within a few days. The courier system that operated along these routes employed professional messengers who had received specialized training in rapid travel techniques, route navigation, and security procedures that protected official correspondence from interception or tampering. These couriers carried official seals and identification documents that enabled them to requisition fresh horses, demand assistance from local authorities, and access way station facilities throughout imperial territories. The reliability and speed of this communication system enabled central authorities to respond quickly to developing situations while providing provincial administrators with current information regarding imperial policy and military developments. Cuneiform correspondence between central and provincial authorities reveals the systematic nature of Neo-Babylonian administrative communication. Official letters followed standardized formats, that facilitated rapid processing while ensuring that essential information was transmitted accurately. These documents employed specialized terminology and abbreviated forms that reduced writing time while maintaining precision in meaning. The use of clay tablets for official correspondence provided durability that enabled long-term archival storage, while creating permanent records that could be referenced during legal proceedings or administrative reviews. The legal systems operating throughout Neo-Babylonian territories built upon millennia of Mesopotamian jurisprudential development, while incorporating adaptations necessary for governing diverse populations with varying legal traditions. The Code of Hammurabi and subsequent Babylonian legal developments provided foundational principles that emphasized proportional punishment, compensation for damages, and protection of property rights that formed the basis for imperial legal administration. However, Neo-Babylonian legal practice demonstrated considerable flexibility in adapting these principles to local conditions and cultural expectations that varied significantly across imperial territories. The administration of justice in provincial territories involved multiple levels of judicial authority that handled different categories of legal disputes, according to their complexity and potential impact on imperial interests. Local courts, presided over by appointed judges who possessed training in both imperial law and regional legal traditions, handled routine civil disputes, minor criminal cases, and commercial disagreements that could be resolved through established legal procedures. These courts employed standardized procedures for evidence presentation, witness examination, and verdict implementation that ensured consistent application of legal principles while accommodating local customs regarding dispute resolution. More serious criminal cases and civil disputes involving substantial financial interests or potential security implications required review by higher judicial authorities who possessed greater expertise in imperial law and direct communication with central legal administrators. These cases often involved complex legal questions that required careful interpretation of imperial statutes in novel circumstances or coordination between different legal jurisdictions when disputes crossed provincial boundaries. The resolution of such cases sometimes required direct consultation with royal legal advisors who provided authoritative interpretations of imperial law that established precedents for future similar cases. Commercial law represented a particularly important aspect of Neo-Babylonian legal administration due to the empire's dependence upon trade revenues and the complex business relationships that connected merchants operating across different cultural and legal systems. Imperial commercial law provided standardized procedures for contract enforcement, dispute resolution, and bankruptcy proceedings that facilitated business relationships while protecting the interests of all parties involved in commercial transactions. These legal frameworks enabled merchants from different cultural backgrounds to engage in complex business relationships with confidence that their agreements would be enforced fairly according to established legal principles. The enforcement of legal decisions throughout imperial territories required coordination between judicial authorities and military commanders, who provided the physical force necessary to implement court orders when voluntary compliance was not forthcoming. This enforcement system operated through established procedures that prevented arbitrary use of force while ensuring that legal decisions were implemented effectively. Military units assigned to legal enforcement duties received specialized training in appropriate procedures for implementing court orders, while minimizing disruption to local communities and commercial activities. Legal archives maintained at provincial administrative centres contained extensive records of judicial proceedings, legal precedents, and administrative decisions that provided reference materials for future cases while creating permanent documentation of legal activities that could be reviewed by higher authorities when necessary. These archives employed systematic organization methods that enabled rapid retrieval of relevant documents while maintaining long-term preservation of legal records that might be referenced decades after their original creation. The maintenance of these archives required specialized personnel who possessed both legal knowledge and archival management skills necessary for effective record keeping. The military organization of the Neo-Babylonian Empire combined traditional Mesopotamian military structures with innovations designed to address the strategic challenges of defending vast territories against diverse external threats while maintaining internal security among culturally diverse populations. The imperial military included both professional units composed of career soldiers who served for extended periods and militia forces drawn from local populations who provided seasonal military service while maintaining civilian occupations during peacetime. This mixed military system provided the flexibility necessary for addressing various security challenges while managing the substantial costs associated with maintaining large standing armies. Professional military units formed the core of Neo-Babylonian military power and included specialized formations trained in different aspects of warfare, including siege operations, cavalry tactics, and engineering activities that supported military campaigns. These units recruited soldiers from throughout imperial territories, often including individuals from conquered populations who had demonstrated military competence and loyalty to imperial authority. The integration of foreign soldiers into imperial military service provided valuable military expertise, while creating opportunities for social advancement that encouraged cooperation with Babylonian rule. The training programs for professional military units emphasized both individual combat skills and unit coordination techniques that enabled effective performance in the complex military operations characteristic of Neo-Babylonian warfare. Soldiers received instruction in weapons handling, tactical formations, and specialized techniques including siege warfare methods, cavalry operations, and engineering activities that supported military campaigns. The duration and intensity of these training programs varied according to the specialized requirements of different military units and the prior experience of individual recruits. The use of foreign mercenaries represented a significant innovation in Neo-Babylonian military organization that provided access to specialized military capabilities while reducing dependence upon domestic population for military service. Mercenary units included cavalry forces from nomadic peoples who possessed superior horsemanship skills, infantry specialists from mountainous regions who excelled in difficult terrain, and siege specialists who brought expertise in advanced military engineering techniques. These mercenary relationships required careful management to ensure loyalty while preventing the development of independent military capabilities that might threaten imperial security. Siege warfare techniques developed during the Neo-Babylonian period incorporated both traditional Mesopotamian methods and innovations learned through military campaigns against fortified cities throughout imperial territories. Babylonian siege operations typically involved the construction of elaborate earthwork fortifications that surrounded target cities while protecting attacking forces from defensive fire. These siege works included ramparts, trenches, and protective barriers that created secure bases for siege engines, while preventing relief efforts by external forces attempting to assist the defenders. The siege engines employed by Neo-Babylonian forces included various types of catapults, battering rams, and siege towers that enabled attacks against different aspects of enemy fortifications. Catapults provided long-range bombardment capabilities that could damage defensive walls while demoralizing defenders through continuous artillery fire. Battering rams concentrated tremendous force against specific points in defensive walls, often in conjunction with undermining operations that weakened wall foundations through tunneling activities. Siege towers enabled attacking forces to reach the top of defensive walls while providing protection from defensive fire during assault operations. The engineering capabilities supporting Neo-Babylonian siege operations included sophisticated techniques for constructing siege works, operating siege engines, and conducting undermining operations that could breach even the strongest fortifications. Military engineers possess specialized knowledge of construction techniques, mechanical principles, and excavation methods that enabled them to adapt siege tactics to different types of fortifications and geographic conditions. These engineering skills also proved valuable for constructing field fortifications, bridge building, and other military construction activities that supported campaign operations in various terrains. The logistical system supporting Neo-Babylonian military operations enabled the deployment and maintenance of large military forces across vast distances, while ensuring adequate supplies of food, equipment, and other necessities required for extended military campaigns. Military logistics involved careful coordination between supply production centres, transportation networks, and field distribution systems that delivered essential materials to military units operating in distant territories. The complexity of these logistical operations required specialized administrative personnel who possessed expertise in supply planning, transportation management, and inventory control techniques. Supply depots positioned at strategic locations throughout imperial territories provided storage facilities for military equipment, food supplies, and other materials necessary for supporting military operations. These depots included warehouse facilities, maintenance workshops, and administrative offices that managed the receipt, storage, and distribution of military supplies according to operational requirements. The strategic placement of these facilities enabled rapid deployment of military forces while ensuring that adequate supplies would be available for extended operations in various regions. The coordination between military and civilian authorities in managing defence requirements involved systematic procedures for requisitioning supplies, recruiting personnel, and coordinating transportation resources necessary for military operations. These procedures balance military needs with civilian economic activities while ensuring that defence requirements did not unduly disrupt agricultural production, commercial activities, or other civilian functions essential for maintaining imperial prosperity. The success of this coordination depended upon effective communication between military commanders and civilian administrators who shared responsibility for managing imperial resources. The death of Nebuchadnezzar II in 562 BC marked the beginning of a precipitous decline in Neo-Babylonian imperial authority that would ultimately culminate in the empire's collapse within just 23 years. The passing of the great king, who had ruled for 43 years and transformed Babylon into the ancient world's most magnificent city, created an immediate succession crisis that exposed fundamental weaknesses in the imperial system he'd constructed. Unlike the carefully managed transitions that had characterized earlier Mesopotamian dynasties, the Neo-Babylonian succession lacked established protocols for ensuring orderly transfers of power, leaving the empire vulnerable to internal conflicts and external pressures that would prove increasingly difficult to manage. Marduk, Nebuchadnezzar's son and designated heir, ascended to the throne amid circumstances that immediately challenged his authority and competence as a ruler. Contemporary sources suggest that the new king possessed neither his father's military acumen nor his administrative capabilities, creating doubts among the powerful Babylonian nobility and priesthood regarding his fitness for imperial leadership. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals a marked decline in major construction projects and military campaigns, suggesting that the new administration struggled to maintain the ambitious programs that had characterized Nebuchadnezzar's reign while managing the complex administrative and diplomatic challenges inherent in governing such vast and diverse territories. The political opposition that emerged against Marduk's rule centered around his controversial decision to release Jehoiachin, the former king of Judah who had been held captive in Babylon since the conquest of Jerusalem in 597 BC. This action, while potentially motivated by diplomatic considerations aimed at reducing tensions with Jewish populations throughout the empire, was perceived by many Babylonian nobles as an inappropriate concession that undermined imperial dignity and established dangerous precedents for the treatment of conquered rulers. The decision demonstrated either political naivety or deliberate policy changes that alienated traditional supporters of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, while failing to generate corresponding benefits in terms of improved provincial stability or international relations. Amel-Marduk's brief reign lasted only 2 years before ending in 560 BC through violent overthrow orchestrated by his brother-in-law Neriglissar, who had served as a military commander under Nebuchadnezzar and enjoyed support among army officers who viewed the king's policies as detrimental to imperial interests. The coup that brought Neriglissar to power represented the first successful internal rebellion against Neo-Babylonian royal authority since the dynasty's establishment, establishing a precedent for political violence that would plague subsequent succession crises. Contemporary Babylonian chronicles describe the overthrow in neutral terms that suggest it was accomplished with relatively little resistance, indicating either widespread dissatisfaction with Amel-Marduk's rule or effective planning by the conspirators who organised his removal. Neriglissar's accession brought temporary stability to imperial administration through his efforts to restore traditional policies and rebuild relationships with alienated constituencies, particularly the powerful Babylonian priesthood, whose support remained essential for maintaining political legitimacy. His background as a military commander provided credibility in dealing with external threats, while his marriage connections to the royal family helped legitimize his claim to the throne despite the violent circumstances of his rise to power. Archaeological evidence suggests that Neriglissar initiated several construction projects aimed at demonstrating royal piety and maintaining the architectural programs that had become symbols of Neo-Babylonian greatness, though these projects operated on significantly reduced scales compared to Nebuchadnezzar's massive undertakings. The military challenges that confronted Neriglissar's administration included renewed conflicts with neighbouring powers who perceived Neo-Babylonian weakness as an opportunity to recover territories lost during earlier periods of imperial expansion. Cilician forces in southeastern Anatolia launched raids against Babylonian territories, requiring military responses that strained imperial resources while demonstrating the empire's continued vulnerability to external pressures. These military operations achieved limited success in maintaining territorial integrity, but they reveal the declining effectiveness of Neo-Babylonian military forces compared to the formidable armies that had conquered Jerusalem and dominated the Levant during Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Neriglissar's death in 556 BC after only 4 years of rule created another succession crisis that further destabilized imperial administration and demonstrated the dynasty's inability to establish stable mechanisms for transferring power between generations. His young son Labashi-Marduk inherited the throne under circumstances that made effective rule virtually impossible, as the boy king lacked both the personal authority necessary for managing powerful court factions and the administrative experience required for addressing the complex challenges facing the empire. The brief reign of Labashi-Marduk, lasting only a few months, ended through another violent coup that brought Nabonidus to power in 556 BC under circumstances that fundamentally altered the character of Neo-Babylonian governance. Nabonidus represented a dramatic departure from previous Neo-Babylonian rulers in terms of his background, religious priorities, and approach to imperial administration. Unlike his predecessors who had emerged from established Babylonian noble families with deep roots in traditional Mesopotamian culture, Nabonidus appears to have been connected to priestly circles associated with the moon god Sin, whose cult centre at Haran in northern Mesopotamia had maintained importance throughout various periods of political change in the region. His mother, Adad-Gupi, served as a high priestess of Sin and wielded considerable influence in religious circles that extended beyond traditional Babylonian boundaries to encompass Aramaean and other populations throughout the northern provinces of the empire. The religious revolution initiated by Nabonidus represented the most controversial aspect of his reign and the primary source of opposition that ultimately contributed to his downfall. his systematic elevation of sin to a position of supreme divine authority challenged the fundamental theological foundations upon which Neo-Babylonian imperial ideology had been constructed since the dynasty's establishment. The traditional supremacy of Marduk, which had provided religious justification for Babylonian political hegemony over diverse populations, faced unprecedented challenge from royal policies that appeared to subordinate Babylon's patron deity to a foreign god whose cult centres lay outside traditional Mesopotamian heartlands. Archaeological evidence from various temple sites reveals the extent of Nabonidus's religious reforms, which included the construction of new temples dedicated to Sin while reducing financial support for traditional Mesopotamian religious institutions. Inscriptions from this period describe the king's dreams and visions in which Sin appeared to command specific religious policies, suggesting that Nabonidus viewed his reforms as divinely mandated rather than merely personal preferences. These religious innovations extended beyond simple theological changes to encompass fundamental alterations in ceremonial practices, priestly hierarchies, and the allocation of temple resources that affected thousands of religious personnel throughout the empire. The opposition of the Babylonian priesthood to Nabonidus's religious policies created a powerful coalition of traditional religious authorities who possessed both the theological expertise necessary for challenging royal religious innovations and the economic resources required for sustaining political resistance. The priests of Marduk, whose temple complex represented one of the wealthiest and most influential institutions in the empire, found their traditional privileges and authority threatened by policies that redirected royal patronage towards Sin's cult, while diminishing the ceremonial importance of traditional Babylonian religious festivals. This priestly opposition provided intellectual leadership and organizational structure for broader resistance movements that included merchants, nobles, and other groups whose interests were adversely affected by the king's policies. The most dramatic manifestation of Nabonidus's religious obsessions involved his prolonged residence at the oasis city of Timar in the Arabian Peninsula, where he established a secondary royal court and devoted extensive resources to archaeological investigations and religious activities related to Sin's worship. This extraordinary decision to abandon Babylon for extended periods, lasting up to 10 years according to some sources, represented an unprecedented departure from traditional Mesopotamian kingship that required the monarch's physical presence in the capital city for the proper performance of essential religious and administrative functions. The king's absence from Babylon prevented the celebration of the crucial Akitu festival, which required royal participation for its proper observance and served as the primary annual reaffirmation of divine sanction for Babylonian rule. The establishment of Timar as an alternative royal residence involved massive construction projects that diverted resources from traditional imperial centres while creating new administrative complexities that strained the empire's governmental systems. Archaeological excavations at Timar have revealed substantial fortifications, palace complexes, and religious installations that demonstrate the scale of Nabonidus's investment in this remote location. The construction of these facilities required the transportation of the building materials, skilled craftsmen, and administrative personnel across hundreds of kilometres of desert terrain, creating logistical challenges that consumed resources while producing facilities of questionable strategic value for imperial defence or administration. The regency arrangement that governed Babylon during Nabonidus's absence placed his son Belshazzar in charge of day-to-day imperial administration, while the king pursued his religious and archaeological interests in Arabia. This division of royal authority between father and son created confusion regarding ultimate decision-making responsibility, while generating conflicts between different administrative approaches that reflected the personalities and priorities of the two rulers. Belshazzar appears to have possessed greater appreciation for traditional Babylonian political and religious practices, but his authority remained limited by his father's ultimate control over major policy decisions and his continued interference in imperial administration from his distant Arabian residence. The administrative challenges created by this unusual governmental arrangement extended beyond simple questions of authority to encompass fundamental problems in communication, coordination, and policy implementation that affected all aspects of imperial governance. Provincial governors found themselves receiving conflicting instructions from Babylon and Timur, while diplomatic representatives from foreign powers struggled to determine appropriate channels for conducting negotiations with Babylonian authorities. The resulting confusion undermined imperial administrative efficiency, while creating opportunities for provincial autonomy that weakened central control over distant territories. Belshazzar's regency coincided with increasing external pressures from the expanding Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, whose military successes against Lydian and other neighbouring powers demonstrated growing Persian capabilities while raising questions about Neo-Babylonian military preparedness. The Persian conquest of Lydia in 546 BC brought Cyrus's forces to within striking distance of Babylonian territories while eliminating a potential ally who might have provided support against Persian expansion. These developments required careful diplomatic and military responses that were complicated by the divided nature of Neo-Babylonian leadership and the ongoing conflicts between traditional and reformed religious policies that weakened internal unity. The economic decline that characterized Nabonidus's reign reflected both the costs of his ambitious projects in Arabia and the disruption of traditional commercial relationships caused by his religious and political innovations. The diversion of resources toward Timur's development reduced investments in traditional economic infrastructure, including irrigation systems, urban construction, and commercial facilities that had supported Neo-Babylonian prosperity during earlier periods. Archaeological evidence suggests declining activity in various craft industries and reduced volumes of international trade that reflected both internal disruptions and external competition from Persian-controlled territories that offered alternative routes and markets for commercial activities. The agricultural productivity that had sustained Neo-Babylonian wealth showed signs of decline during this period, due to reduced maintenance of irrigation systems and the disruption of traditional administrative procedures that had coordinated agricultural activities across vast territorial regions. Temple archives from this period document conflicts over water rights, reduced crop yields, and difficulties in collecting agricultural taxes that reflected broader administrative problems affecting rural areas throughout the empire. These agricultural difficulties created food supply problems for urban populations, while reducing the tax revenues available for supporting military forces and administrative activities. Commercial relationships with foreign trading partners also suffered disruption due to the uncertainty created by Nabonidus's unconventional policies and the growing Persian threat that made long-term commercial planning increasingly difficult. Merchants who had invested in Babylonian trade relationships found their activities complicated by political instability and religious conflicts that created unpredictable conditions for business operations. The development of alternative trade routes through Persian-controlled territories provided competitors with advantages that further reduced Neo-Babylonian commercial revenues while strengthening potential enemies who could use these economic resources for military purposes. The military weaknesses that became apparent during Nabonidus's reign reflected both the decline in available resources and the demoralization of professional military units whose loyalty had been undermined by religious controversies and administrative confusion. The traditional connection between military service and religious devotion, which had motivated Babylonian soldiers through identification with Marduk's divine protection, suffered disruption from policies that subordinated traditional deities to foreign religious innovations. Military units recruited from various ethnic groups throughout the empire found their cultural identities challenged by religious changes that appeared to favour particular regional traditions over the syncretic approaches that had previously accommodated diverse religious practices. The fortification systems that had protected Babylonian territories during earlier periods, required continuous maintenance and periodic updating to address evolving military technologies and strategic threats, but the resources necessary for these activities were increasingly diverted toward other priorities during Nabonidus's reign. Archaeological evidence suggests reduced maintenance of defensive walls, neglect of military equipment and declining recruitment of professional soldiers that left imperial territories vulnerable to external attack, while reducing the military capabilities available for maintaining internal order among potentially rebellious populations. The intelligence networks that had provided early warning of external threats and internal conspiracies also suffered degradation due to administrative disruptions and the alienation of local populations whose cooperation had been essential for effective intelligence gathering. The traditional relationships between imperial administrators and local leaders, which had facilitated information flow regarding potential security threats, were strained by religious and political policies that created suspicions and conflicts between different levels of governmental authority. This intelligence degradation left imperial authorities increasingly isolated from accurate information regarding developing threats, while reducing their ability to respond effectively to emerging challenges. The deteriorating conditions within the Neo-Babylonian Empire during Nabonidus's final years created unprecedented opportunities for Cyrus II of Persia, whose expanding Achaemenid Empire had systematically absorbed neighbouring kingdoms throughout the 540 SBC while developing sophisticated military and administrative capabilities that would soon be tested against Babylon's formidable defences. The Persian king's approach to territorial expansion differed markedly from earlier conquerors, who had relied primarily upon military force and subsequent brutal suppression of conquered populations. Instead, Cyrus developed comprehensive strategies that combined military pressure with diplomatic inducements and propaganda campaigns designed to undermine enemy resistance, while presenting Persian rule as liberation from oppressive governance rather than foreign conquest. The Persian military machine that advanced toward Babylonian territories in 540 BC represented the culmination of decades of military innovation and organizational development that had transformed a relatively small Iranian kingdom into the ancient world's most formidable military power. Unlike traditional Near Eastern armies that relied heavily upon infantry formations supported by limited cavalry units, Persian forces incorporated sophisticated combined arms tactics that utilized large numbers of mounted archers alongside infantry units equipped with advanced weaponry and siege equipment. The Persian army's organizational structure enabled rapid deployment across vast distances while maintaining logistical support systems that could sustain extended military campaigns in hostile territories far from Persian homeland bases. The cavalry forces that formed the core of Persian military power included both heavy cavalry units equipped with armour and lances for shock combat, and light cavalry archers whose mobility and firepower provided tactical flexibility unavailable to more traditional military formations. These mounted units had proven their effectiveness in campaigns against Lydian forces, where Persian cavalry had successfully countered the famous Lydian horsemen who had previously dominated battlefield tactics throughout western Anatolia. The integration of different cavalry types within unified tactical formations enabled Persian commanders to adapt their military approaches to various battlefield conditions while maintaining consistent pressure against enemy forces through coordinated attacks that exploited weaknesses in traditional defensive formations. Persian infantry units employed advanced weaponry including iron-tipped spears, composite bows and protective equipment that provided superior performance compared to the bronze weapons still common among many Near Eastern armies. The standardization of equipment and training procedures throughout Persian military units created professional forces whose discipline and coordination exceeded that of most contemporary armies, while recruitment policies that incorporated soldiers from various ethnic backgrounds provided access to diverse military traditions and specialized combat techniques. These multi-ethnic military formations demonstrated the Persian Empire's ability to integrate conquered populations into imperial service, while utilizing their distinctive military capabilities for broader strategic purposes. The siege warfare capabilities developed by Persian military engineers incorporated lessons learned from previous campaigns, while adapting traditional techniques to address the specific challenges presented by Mesopotamian fortification systems. Persian siege operations typically began with comprehensive intelligence gathering that identified weaknesses in enemy defences while assessing the political and economic factors that might influence the duration and intensity of resistance. This intelligence work involved networks of merchants, diplomats, and local informants who provided detailed information regarding defensive preparations, food supplies, internal political divisions, and potential sources of external support that might affect siege outcomes. The engineering techniques employed by Persian siege specialists included sophisticated approaches to undermining fortification walls, constructing siege engines capable of breaching defensive barriers, and establishing blockade systems that prevented supplies from reaching besieged cities while maintaining secure supply lines for attacking forces. Persian military engineers had developed portable siege equipment that could be transported across long distances and assembled rapidly at target locations, enabling siege operations to begin quickly after the arrival of Persian forces while reducing the logistical burden associated with transporting heavy siege machinery across difficult terrain. The psychological warfare tactics that accompanied Persian military operations represented innovative approaches to reducing enemy resistance through propaganda campaigns that portrayed Persian rule as beneficial for conquered populations, while emphasizing the futility of continued resistance against superior Persian military capabilities. These propaganda efforts included the circulation of proclamations that promised religious tolerance, economic prosperity, and political autonomy for populations that submitted voluntarily to Persian authority, while simultaneously describing the harsh consequences that awaited communities that chose to resist Persian expansion through military action. Cyrus's strategic approach to conquering Babylon involved careful preparation that extended over several years and included diplomatic initiatives designed to undermine Nabonidus's political support, while encouraging defection among key Babylonian military and civilian leaders. Persian diplomatic agents established contact with disaffected Babylonian nobles, priests, and military commanders who opposed Nabonidus's religious policies and administrative methods, offering incentives for cooperation that included promises of continued authority under Persian rule and protection from potential retaliation by loyalist forces. These diplomatic efforts created networks of potential collaborators within Babylonian territories, while providing Persian forces with detailed intelligence regarding Babylonian defensive preparations and internal political conditions. The timing of the Persian advance toward Babylon coincided with the autumn harvest season of 540 BC, when agricultural activities throughout Mesopotamia created opportunities for Persian forces to acquire local food supplies while disrupting Babylonian economic activities that supported military resistance. Persian military columns advanced along multiple routes that prevented Babylonian forces from concentrating their defensive efforts while creating uncertainty regarding Persian strategic objectives that complicated Babylonian military planning. The Persian advance proceeded systematically through Babylonian provincial territories, with Persian commanders offering terms for surrender that encouraged local cooperation while demonstrating Persian military capabilities through carefully orchestrated displays of force. The Siege of Sippar, a major Babylonian city located approximately 60 kilometers north of Babylon, demonstrated Persian siege capabilities while providing opportunities for psychological warfare that influenced subsequent military operations throughout the region. Persian forces surrounded Sippar with elaborate siege works that included earthen ramparts, wooden palisades, and siege engines positioned to breach the city's defensive walls. However, the actual assault on Sippar involved limited fighting, as the city's defenders chose to surrender after brief resistance that confirmed Persian military superiority, while minimizing casualties among both attacking and defending forces. The surrender of Sippar provided Persian forces with a strategic base for operations against Babylon, while demonstrating to other Babylonian cities the advantages of voluntary submission over prolonged resistance. Persian treatment of Sippar's population following the surrender included protection of civilian inhabitants, respect for local religious institutions, and continuation of normal economic activities under Persian administrative oversight. These policies created positive examples that Persian propaganda agents could cite when encouraging other cities to surrender voluntarily, while demonstrating Persian commitment to the generous treatment promised in their diplomatic communications with potential collaborators. The advance of Persian forces toward Babylon itself required careful coordination between military operations and diplomatic initiatives that aimed to prevent unified Babylonian resistance, while encouraging defections among key military and civilian leaders, whose cooperation could facilitate Persian conquest with minimal fighting. Persian intelligence networks within Babylon provided detailed information regarding the city's defensive preparations, the loyalty of various military units, and the political divisions that had weakened Babylonian unity during Nabonidus's controversial reign. This intelligence enabled Persian commanders to develop specific plans for exploiting Babylonian weaknesses while avoiding unnecessary military confrontations that might prolong the siege or increase casualties among Persian forces. The famous Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1879 and now housed in the British Museum, provides contemporary Persian perspective on the conquest of Babylon that reveals sophisticated propaganda techniques designed to legitimize Persian rule, while portraying the conquest as liberation from oppressive governance rather than foreign invasion. The cylinder's cuneiform inscription, written in Akkadian for Babylonian audiences, describes Cyrus as a divinely chosen ruler appointed by Marduk himself to restore proper religious observances and just governance to Babylonian territories. This theological framework adapted traditional Mesopotamian concepts of divine kingship to Persian political purposes while addressing Babylonian religious concerns that had been exacerbated by Nabonidus's controversial religious innovations. The cylinder's description of Nabonidus's reign emphasizes religious violations and administrative failures that justified divine intervention through Persian conquest, presenting Cyrus as Marduk's agent for restoring cosmic order, rather than a foreign conqueror imposing alien rule upon Babylonian populations. The text describes how Marduk searched through all the countries looking for a righteous ruler willing to lead in the annual procession, and selected Cyrus to fulfill this divine mission by conquering Babylon and restoring proper religious practices. This theological interpretation provided religious justification for Persian rule, while addressing Babylonian concerns about the legitimacy of foreign governance over sacred Mesopotamian territories. The cylinder's promises regarding Persian policies toward conquered populations included commitments to religious tolerance, cultural preservation, and the restoration of traditional practices that had been disrupted during Nabonidus's reign. These promises specifically addressed the concerns of various ethnic and religious groups within Babylonian territories, including deported populations who had been forcibly relocated during earlier Neo-Babylonian military campaigns. The Persian commitment to allowing displaced populations to return to their ancestral territories represented a dramatic departure from traditional Near Eastern conquest policies that typically involved further deportations and cultural suppression designed to prevent rebellions against foreign rule. The actual conquest of Babylon in October 539 BC occurred with remarkably little fighting, suggesting that Persian diplomatic and propaganda efforts had successfully undermined Babylonian resistance, while encouraging widespread cooperation with Persian forces. Contemporary Babylonian chronicles describe the Persian entry into Babylon as a peaceful occupation rather than a violent conquest, with Persian forces entering the city without significant military resistance, while maintaining order and protecting civilian populations from the violence typically associated with urban conquest. This peaceful transition reflected both Persian diplomatic success and the extent of Babylonian dissatisfaction with Nabonidus' rule, which had alienated crucial constituencies whose support was essential for effective military resistance. The circumstances surrounding Nabonidus' capture remain somewhat unclear in contemporary sources, though most accounts suggest that the king was taken prisoner without significant resistance while attempting to flee from Babylon as Persian forces approached the city. Some sources indicate that Nabonidus had returned from Timur shortly before the Persian conquest, possibly in response to the growing military threat, but his efforts to organize effective resistance were hampered by the political opposition that his policies had generated among Babylonian nobles, priests and military commanders. His capture effectively ended organized Babylonian resistance to Persian conquest while providing Cyrus with a valuable symbolic victory that demonstrated Persian dominance over the last independent Mesopotamian kingdom. Belshazzar's fate during the Persian conquest is documented in various sources that describe his death during the final stages of Babylonian resistance, though the specific circumstances vary between different accounts. The biblical narrative in the book of Daniel describes Belshazzar's death during a feast on the night of Babylon's fall, while Babylonian chronicles provide less dramatic accounts that suggest he died during military operations associated with the Persian conquest. Regardless of the specific circumstances, Belshazzar's death eliminated the last potential focus for Babylonian resistance, while enabling Persian authorities to consolidate their control over imperial territories without continued challenges from surviving members of the Neo-Babylonian royal family. The Persian policies implemented immediately following the conquest of Babylon demonstrated Cyrus's commitment to the promises outlined in his propaganda campaigns, while establishing administrative systems that integrated Babylonian territories into the broader Persian Empire without disrupting local institutions and practices unnecessarily. Persian administrative appointments included both Persian officials who provided direct imperial oversight and Babylonian administrators who possessed essential knowledge of local conditions and established relationships with regional populations. This mixed administrative approach enabled effective Persian control while maintaining continuity in governmental services that affected daily life for ordinary Babylonian inhabitants. The restoration of traditional Babylonian religious practices represented one of the most significant Persian policy initiatives following the conquest, directly addressing the religious controversies that had undermined Nabonidus' political support while demonstrating Persian respect for local cultural traditions. Persian authorities organized the resumption of the Akitu festival, which had been suspended during Nabonidus' reign due to his absence from Babylon and his conflicts with traditional Mesopotamian religious institutions. The celebration of this crucial religious festival under Persian auspices provided public demonstration of Persian commitment to maintaining Babylonian cultural identity while establishing Persian rule as legitimate successor to traditional Mesopotamian kingship. The economic policies implemented by Persian administrators aimed to restore commercial prosperity while integrating Babylonian economic activities into broader Persian imperial systems that connected territories from India to the Mediterranean Sea. Persian control over extensive trade networks provided new opportunities for Babylonian merchants while ensuring continued prosperity for urban populations, whose cooperation was essential for maintaining political stability. The standardization of weights, measures and currency systems across Persian territories facilitated commercial activities while reducing transaction costs for merchants operating across long distances and diverse political jurisdictions. The treatment of deported populations within Babylonian territories followed Persian policies that encouraged the return of displaced groups to their ancestral territories while providing support for reconstruction activities that restored communities disrupted by earlier military campaigns. The most famous example of these policies involved Persian support for Jewish return to Jerusalem and the reconstruction of the temple, though similar policies applied to other deported groups throughout former Babylonian territories. These repatriation programs served multiple Persian political objectives, including the reduction of potential sources of internal unrest, the restoration of productive economic activities in previously disrupted regions, and the creation of grateful populations whose loyalty to Persian rule was reinforced by Persian assistance in recovering their cultural and religious institutions. The administrative integration of Babylonian territories into the Persian Empire involved the establishment of satrapies that balanced imperial control with local autonomy, while maintaining the economic productivity and cultural vitality that had characterized Mesopotamian civilization for millennia. The satrap appointed to govern Babylonian territories possessed extensive authority over local administration, while remaining accountable to central Persian authorities for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and providing military forces when required for imperial campaigns. This administrative system enabled Persian authorities to benefit from Babylonian wealth and expertise, while avoiding the administrative costs and political risks associated with direct imperial governance over culturally distinct populations. The Persian conquest of Babylon marked the end of over 3,000 years of independent Mesopotamian political authority, as subsequent rulers of the region would be either foreign conquerors or governors appointed by distant imperial capitals. The peaceful nature of this transition reflected both Persian diplomatic skill and the internal weaknesses that had undermined Neo-Babylonian imperial authority during its final decades. However, the conquest also demonstrated the continued importance of Mesopotamian territories for any power seeking to control the ancient Near East, as Persian authorities invested substantial resources in maintaining Babylonian prosperity while utilizing Mesopotamian administrative expertise for governing their vast empire. The cultural and intellectual traditions that had flourished under Neo-Babylonian rule continued to influence Persian imperial policies while contributing to the cosmopolitan character that distinguished Persian civilization from earlier Near Eastern empires that relied more heavily upon cultural suppression and administrative uniformity for maintaining imperial unity. The collapse of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 539 BC did not mark the end of Mesopotamian civilization, but rather its transformation into a foundational component of successive imperial systems that would dominate the ancient world for centuries to come. The cultural, administrative, and intellectual achievements developed during the brief but brilliant Neo-Babylonian period became integral elements of Persian, Hellenistic, and Islamic civilizations, creating a continuous thread of Mesopotamian influence that extended far beyond the political boundaries of any single empire. The preservation and transmission of Neo-Babylonian innovations occurred through multiple channels that ensured the survival of crucial knowledge systems while adapting them to new political and cultural contexts that emerged as the ancient Near East underwent successive waves of conquest and cultural transformation. The Persian administration that replaced Neo-Babylonian rule demonstrated remarkable sophistication in preserving and utilizing Mesopotamian administrative traditions while integrating them into the broader imperial system that governed territories stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Persian officials recognized that the complex bureaucratic procedures developed over centuries of Mesopotamian governance provided essential tools for managing diverse populations and extracting resources from agricultural and commercial activities that required specialized knowledge of local conditions. The cuneiform archives maintained at Babylon and other administrative centers continued to function under Persian oversight, with Babylonian scribes and administrators retaining their positions while adapting their expertise to serve new imperial masters who appreciated the value of established governmental procedures. The legal traditions codified during the Neo-Babylonian period exercised profound influence on subsequent legal development throughout the Persian Empire and beyond. The sophisticated jurisprudential principles that had evolved from earlier Mesopotamian legal codes provided frameworks for resolving disputes, regulating commercial activities, and maintaining social order among culturally diverse populations that characterized imperial territories. Persian legal administrators incorporated Babylonian legal precedents into imperial law, while maintaining local legal traditions that address specific regional requirements. This synthetic approach to legal administration created hybrid legal systems that combined the best features of different legal traditions, while maintaining sufficient flexibility to accommodate the diverse cultural expectations of imperial subjects. The commercial law developed during the Neo-Babylonian period proved particularly influential in shaping subsequent business practices throughout the ancient world. The sophisticated financial instruments created by Babylonian banking houses provided models for commercial credit, international money transfers, and investment partnerships that facilitated trade relationships across vast distances and complex political boundaries. Persian merchants and administrators adopted these financial innovations while expanding their application to serve the needs of an empire that encompassed even more diverse economic systems and commercial relationships than had existed during the Neo-Babylonian period. The astronomical and mathematical knowledge accumulated by Neo-Babylonian scholars represented one of their most enduring contributions to human intellectual development. The precise observations of planetary movements, eclipse predictions, and calendar calculations developed by Babylonian astronomers provided foundational data that influenced Greek, Islamic, and medieval European scientific traditions. The mathematical techniques employed in these astronomical calculations, including sophisticated methods for handling complex numerical relationships and geometric problems, established precedents that influenced mathematical development throughout subsequent civilizations that inherited and expanded upon Mesopotamian intellectual achievements. The cuneiform archives preserved at Babylon and other Neo-Babylonian sites contained extensive documentation of administrative procedures, legal precedents, commercial practices, and scientific observations that provided invaluable resources for subsequent scholars and administrators. Persian authorities recognized the importance of these archives and invested substantial resources in their preservation and continued maintenance. Scribal schools that had trained administrators during the Neo-Babylonian period continued to operate under Persian oversight, ensuring that the knowledge necessary for reading and interpreting cuneiform documents remained available for practical administrative purposes while contributing to the preservation of Mesopotamian intellectual traditions. The architectural and engineering innovations developed during the Neo-Babylonian period influenced construction techniques throughout the Persian Empire and subsequent civilizations that inherited Persian territorial control. The advanced hydraulic engineering that had enabled intensive agricultural production in Mesopotamia provided models for irrigation projects in other regions where Persian authorities sought to increase agricultural productivity and support larger populations. The glazed brick technology perfected for decorating Neo-Babylonian buildings influenced Persian architectural decoration, while contributing to artistic traditions that spread throughout the ancient world through commercial and cultural exchange networks. The urban planning principles implemented in Neo-Babylonian cities provided precedents for subsequent urban development projects throughout the Persian Empire and later civilizations. The systematic approach to street layout, residential zoning, and commercial district organization developed in Babylon influenced the design of new cities established by Persian authorities, while contributing to urban planning traditions that affected city development throughout the ancient world. The integration of defensive, ceremonial, and commercial functions within unified urban designs created models that influenced urban architecture for centuries after the fall of Neo-Babylonian political authority. The impact of Neo-Babylonian civilization on Jewish history and theology proved particularly profound and enduring, fundamentally shaping religious and cultural developments that would influence Judaism, Christianity, and Islam for millennia to come. The Babylonian exile experience created conditions that fostered significant innovations in Jewish religious thought, while exposing Hebrew intellectual traditions to sophisticated Mesopotamian theological and philosophical concepts that enriched Jewish cultural development in ways that extended far beyond the immediate circumstances of deportation and eventual return to Jerusalem. The development of synagogue institutions during the Babylonian exile represented a revolutionary adaptation that enabled Jewish communities to maintain their religious identity without access to the Jerusalem temple. These local religious assemblies created new forms of worship, religious education, and community organization that proved crucial for Jewish survival during subsequent periods of dispersion and persecution. The synagogue system developed during the Neo-Babylonian period provided organizational models that influenced Jewish community development throughout the ancient world, while establishing precedents for congregational worship that would later influence Christian and Islamic religious practices. The theological developments that occurred during the Babylonian exile reflected Jewish engagement with sophisticated Mesopotamian religious and philosophical traditions, while maintaining distinctly monotheistic perspectives that distinguished Jewish beliefs from the polytheistic systems that characterized most ancient Near Eastern religions. Jewish exposure to Babylonian creation myths, flood narratives, and wisdom literature contributed to the development of Hebrew religious texts that incorporated Mesopotamian literary techniques while expressing uniquely Jewish theological insights. This cultural synthesis created religious literature that demonstrated both continuity with earlier Hebrew traditions and innovative adaptations that reflected the intellectual stimulation provided by exposure to Mesopotamian civilization. The development of Jewish legal traditions during the exile period showed significant influence from Babylonian jurisprudential methods while maintaining distinctive Jewish approaches to religious law and community governance. The casuistic legal reasoning characteristics of Babylonian law influenced the development of rabbinic legal methodology that emerged during and after the exile period. Jewish scholars adopted Mesopotamian techniques for analyzing specific legal cases to establish general principles while applying these methods to distinctly Jewish religious and ethical concerns that reflected their monotheistic worldview and covenant theology. The preservation of Hebrew historical and religious traditions during the exile period occurred through systematic efforts to collect, edit, and preserve literary works that documented Jewish religious beliefs and historical experiences. The intellectual environment of Babylonian exile provided opportunities for scholarly work that contributed to the formation of significant portions of the Hebrew Bible, including historical works, prophetic literature, and wisdom texts that reflected both traditional Jewish perspectives and intellectual influences derived from exposure to Mesopotamian culture. This literary activity created foundational texts that would influence Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religious development for centuries to come. The return of Jewish exiles to Jerusalem under Persian auspices demonstrated the practical implementation of Persian policies that encouraged the restoration of traditional religious and cultural institutions throughout imperial territories. The reconstruction of the Jerusalem temple with Persian support provided tangible evidence of Persian commitment to religious tolerance, while creating opportunities for Jewish communities to re-establish their traditional religious practices in their ancestral territory. However, the Jewish communities that returned to Jerusalem had been profoundly influenced by their Babylonian exile experience, bringing with them religious innovations, cultural adaptations, and intellectual perspectives that permanently altered the character of Jewish civilization. The archaeological rediscovery of Neo-Babylonian civilization during the 19th and 20th centuries revealed the extraordinary sophistication and cultural richness of this relatively brief but influential period in ancient Near Eastern history. The excavations conducted at Babylon by German archaeologists beginning in 1899 uncovered spectacular architectural remains, including the Ishtar Gate, portions of the processional way, and extensive palace complexes that demonstrated the scale and magnificence of Neo-Babylonian construction projects. These archaeological discoveries provided physical evidence that confirmed and expanded upon the accounts of classical authors who had described Babylon's wonders while revealing aspects of Neo-Babylonian civilization that had been unknown from literary sources alone. The thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered at Neo-Babylonian sites provided unprecedented insights into the daily life, commercial activities, administrative procedures, and cultural practices that characterized this civilization. The Murasu archive and other business records reveal the complexity of Neo-Babylonian economic life, while documenting the integration of diverse ethnic communities into imperial society. Administrative archives provided detailed documentation of governmental procedures, legal practices, and diplomatic relationships that reveal the sophisticated methods employed for governing vast and culturally diverse territories. The artistic achievements revealed through archaeological excavation demonstrated the high level of technical and aesthetic sophistication attained by Neo-Babylonian craftsmen and artists. The glazed brick reliefs from the Ishtar Gate and processional way showed remarkable mastery of ceramic technology, while creating artistic works of exceptional beauty and cultural significance. The discovery of these artistic treasures contributed to broader appreciation of ancient Near Eastern cultural achievements, while providing evidence of the cultural synthesis that characterized Neo-Babylonian civilization through its incorporation of artistic influences from throughout the empire's diverse territories. The scientific and mathematical texts discovered at Neo-Babylonian sites revealed the advanced state of Mesopotamian intellectual development during this period. Astronomical observations, mathematical calculations, and medical texts demonstrated the sophisticated approaches to scientific investigation that characterized Neo-Babylonian scholarship. These discoveries contributed to understanding of ancient scientific development, while revealing the extent to which Neo-Babylonian intellectual achievements influenced subsequent Greek, Islamic, and medieval European scientific traditions. The influence of Neo-Babylonian civilization on subsequent Persian, Hellenistic, and Islamic civilizations in the region created continuities that connected ancient Mesopotamian achievements with later cultural developments throughout the Middle East and beyond. The Persian Empire's adoption of Neo-Babylonian administrative methods, legal principles, and cultural practices created precedents that influenced imperial governance throughout the ancient world. The Hellenistic kingdoms that succeeded Persian rule in Mesopotamia maintained many of these traditions, while adding Greek cultural elements that created new synthetic civilizations, combining Mesopotamian, Persian, and Greek influences. The Islamic conquest of Mesopotamia in the 7th century AD brought new cultural and religious influences to the region while maintaining continuities with earlier civilizational achievements that had characterized the area for millennia. Islamic scholars translated and preserved many ancient Mesopotamian texts, while incorporating Mesopotamian scientific and mathematical knowledge into Islamic intellectual traditions. The city of Baghdad, established near the site of ancient Babylon, became a major center of Islamic learning that continued Mesopotamia's traditional role as a focal point for cultural and intellectual development in the Middle East. The enduring significance of Neo-Babylonian civilization extends far beyond its relatively brief political existence to encompass its fundamental contributions to human cultural development. The administrative innovations, legal principles, scientific achievements, and cultural syntheses developed during this period provided foundational elements that influenced civilizational development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The Neo-Babylonian Empire's brief but brilliant flowering demonstrated the creative possibilities that could emerge when diverse cultural traditions were brought together under effective political leadership that encouraged cultural exchange while maintaining respect for different ethnic and religious identities. The legacy of the Neo-Babylonian Empire ultimately rests upon its demonstration that political authority could be exercised effectively over diverse populations through policies that balanced imperial unity with cultural diversity. The empire's achievements in architecture, urban planning, scientific investigation, and cultural synthesis created models that influenced subsequent civilizations, while contributing to the cumulative development of human knowledge and cultural sophistication. Though the empire's political existence lasted less than a century, its cultural and intellectual contributions continued to influence human development for millennia, establishing the Neo-Babylonian period as one of the most significant chapters in the long history of Mesopotamian civilization and its enduring contributions to human progress.